They said the horse was dying. They said the woman was crazy. What they didn't know was that both carried the same secret, a mark that powerful men had killed to hide. When Mara Vance walked into that auction house and bid on a crippled black stallion everyone else had abandoned, the whole town of Red Hollow laughed. But Mara wasn't listening to them anymore. She was listening to the voice of her dead husband, whispering from a mountain grave, telling her the truth was still alive. And it was standing right in front of her, branded with proof. If you want to see how far this story goes, hit that like button and drop a comment with your city. Let's see where this journey takes us. Part 1. The wind cut across the ridge like a blade that morning, sharp enough to draw blood from the sky itself. Mara Vance stood at the edge of her porch, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. She didn't drink it. She never did anymore. The ritual was just something to fill her hands, to keep them from shaking, to give her something to hold on to besides the edge of a cliff she'd been standing on for 3 years. 3 years since they'd found James. 3 years since they'd told her it was an accident. 3 years since she'd stopped believing a damn word anyone in Red Hollow said. The town sprawled below her like a dying animal, all rust-colored roofs and sagging porches, clinging to the mountainside as if gravity itself had grown tired of holding it up. Once, there had been mines. Once, there had been money. Once, there had been a reason for Red Hollow to exist. Now it was just a collection of people too stubborn or too broken to leave, watching each other through dirty windows and passing judgment like it was the only currency left. And Mara? Mara was the favorite subject. The widow on the ridge. The crazy woman who won't let it go. The one who can't accept that her husband was just another drunk fool who got himself killed in the mountains. She could hear their voices even up here, carried on the wind like poison. She'd stopped going into town months ago. Stopped trying to make them understand. Stopped trying to make them care. But today was different. Today she was going back. Mara dumped the cold coffee over the porch rail and watched it splatter on the rocks below. Then she went inside, pulled on her husband's old canvas jacket, still smelling faintly of him, of tobacco and pine, and something else she couldn't name, and grabbed her truck keys from the hook by the door. The drive down the mountain took 20 minutes, every switchback a reminder of how far she'd climbed away from everything. She liked it that way. Distance meant safety. Distance meant she didn't have to see the pity in their eyes, the way they looked at her like she was something broken that needed fixing or putting down. The auction yard sat on the eastern edge of town, a sprawling collection of rusted metal fences and weathered wooden pens that smelled like manure and desperation. Mara had only been here once before, years ago, when James had bought their first and only horse, a gentle mare named Clover who died the winter after he did. She hadn't planned on ever coming back, but then she'd heard about the black horse. The rumors had filtered up the mountain like smoke, carried by the few people who still bothered to acknowledge her existence. A wreck of an animal, they said. Half dead already, crippled, mean as hell. The kind of horse you put a bullet in, not a bridle. But there was something else in those rumors, something that had caught in Mara's chest like a fishhook. Military brand, someone had said. Old one, real old. She'd tried to ignore it. She'd tried to tell herself it didn't mean anything, that she was grasping at shadows, seeing connections where there were none. But she couldn't stop thinking about it, couldn't stop seeing James's face the last time she'd seen him alive, pale and drawn, his eyes burning with something that looked like fever, but felt like fear. There's something up there, Mara. Something they don't want anyone to find. She'd asked him what. She'd begged him to tell her. But he'd just kissed her forehead and promised he'd explain everything when he got back. He never got back. The auction had already started when Mara pulled into the gravel lot. She could hear the auctioneer's voice echoing across the yard, sharp and rhythmic, turning living creatures into numbers and dollar signs. She parked at the far end, away from the cluster of pickup trucks and horse trailers, and made her way toward the sound. People noticed her immediately. She could feel their eyes on her back, could hear the whispers starting up like cicadas in summer. That's her. What's she doing here? Someone should tell her to go home. Mara kept walking. The crowd around the auction ring was sparse, maybe 30 people, mostly ranchers and dealers, the kind of hard-eyed men who knew the price of everything and the value of nothing. They parted slightly as she approached, not out of courtesy but out of something closer to discomfort, like she was a ghost who'd wandered into the wrong funeral. She ignored them and focused on the ring. The auctioneer was a heavyset man named Dutch Carraway, who'd been running this operation since before Mara was born. He stood on a raised platform, his voice booming through a crackling microphone as he gestured toward the animal in the center of the pen. And there it was, the black horse. Mara's breath caught. It was worse than she'd imagined. The horse stood at an awkward angle, favoring its right foreleg, which was swollen and twisted at an unnatural angle. Its coat was matted and dull, stretched tight over jutting ribs. Scars crisscrossed its shoulders and flanks, old wounds that had healed badly or not at all. But it was the eyes that stopped her cold, dark and deep and burning with something that wasn't quite rage and wasn't quite fear, but somehow both. The horse wasn't broken. Not yet. Despite everything, the pain, the neglect, the certainty of death, it was still fighting. Mara knew that look. She'd seen it in her own mirror every morning for 3 years. "Now I ain't gonna lie to you folks," Dutch was saying, his tone carrying the false joviality of a man trying to sell garbage. "This here's a project horse. Gonna take time, gonna take money, gonna take someone with more patience than sense." A few scattered laughs from the crowd. "But he's got papers, got lineage, and hell, if you can get him sound, he might be worth something to somebody." "What's his story?" someone called out. Dutch shrugged. "Came out of a farm liquidation up north. Previous owner died. No family. State seized the assets." He squinted at a paper in his hand. "Says here he's 12 years old, thoroughbred cross, and..." He paused, frowning. "Huh. Says he's got some kind of military registration. Old one." Mara's heart kicked against her ribs. "What kind of registration?" she heard herself ask. The crowd turned to stare at her. Dutch's eyes narrowed. "Mara Vance," he said slowly. "Didn't expect to see you here." "What kind of registration?" she repeated, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. Dutch looked uncomfortable now. "Don't know all the details. Just says military registry, some program from way back. Probably nothing. Can I see the papers?" "Auction rules, ma'am. Buyer gets the papers after purchase." "Then start the bidding." The words came out before she could stop them. The crowd stirred, a ripple of surprise and confusion. Dutch recovered quickly. "All right then, let's start at, say, $50. Do I hear 50? Silence. Mara could feel everyone waiting, watching to see if she was serious. $50, she said clearly. Dutch nodded. Got 50. Do I hear 75? Anyone? This is a registered horse, folks. Papers and everything. More silence. One of the ranchers near the front spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "Ain't worth the bullet," someone muttered. "Going once at 50, Dutch called. "Going twice." Actually, a new voice cut in, smooth and cold as river ice. "I'll bid 100. Mara turned. The man who'd spoken stood near the back of the crowd, partially hidden by the shadow of a horse trailer. He was younger than most of the buyers, maybe early 30s, with neat dark hair and a face that belonged in a boardroom, not an auction yard. He wore jeans and boots like everyone else, but they looked new, unstained, costume pieces rather than work clothes. Mara had never seen him before. "Well now," Dutch said, perking up. "Got 100. Do I hear 125? The man's eyes met Mara's across the crowd. There was nothing friendly in that gaze, nothing warm. It was the look of someone evaluating a problem. 125, Mara said. 150, the man countered immediately. 200. 3. The crowd was murmuring now, confused. Who the hell were these people, and why were they bidding on a crippled horse that should have been sold for meat? Mara's mind raced. She didn't have much money. James's pension had dried up, and her savings were nearly gone. She'd come here planning to spend maybe 100, maybe 2 if she had to. But this man, whoever he was trying to stop her. She could feel it in her bones. And that meant the horse mattered, which meant James had been right. 500, she said, her voice cutting through the whispers. The crowd went silent. The man's jaw tightened. For a long moment he said nothing, his eyes locked on Mara's. Then, very deliberately, he smiled. 550. 600. 7. Mara's hands clenched into fists. 700 was everything she had left, literally everything. If she went higher, she'd be betting on credit she didn't have, promises she couldn't keep. But she thought of James, thought of the way he'd looked that last morning, the fear in his eyes, the certainty that he was on to something real, something they don't want anyone to find. $1,000, she said. The crowd erupted. Dutch banged his gavel, trying to restore order, but the damage was done. People were shouting, laughing, shaking their heads. $1,000 for a horse that would probably be dead in a month? The widow on the ridge had finally lost her mind. The strange man's smile never wavered. He studied Mara for a long moment, then gave a slight nod, almost respectful, almost amused. "Congratulations," he said quietly, though the auction ring was too loud for anyone but Mara to hear. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows between the trailers. "Sold!" Dutch shouted, banging his gavel one final time. $1,000 to Mara Vance. "Ma'am, you can settle up at the office." Mara barely heard him. Her heart was hammering, her vision swimming slightly. She'd just spent money she didn't have on a horse she couldn't afford to keep, betting everything on a hunch that could be nothing but grief and madness. But as she looked at the black horse standing in the center of the ring, still defiant despite everything, she knew she'd made the right choice, or the worst mistake of her life. An hour later, Mara stood in the auction yard's small office, signing papers with a hand that refused to stay steady. The clerk, a tired-looking woman named Sheila, who'd gone to high school with James, processed the transaction without meeting Mara's eyes. "You're going to need a trailer," Sheila said flatly. "And probably a vet. That leg looks bad." "I know. I'm serious, Mara. That horse might not even make it up the mountain. I'll manage." Sheila sighed and pushed a manila folder across the desk. "Here's his papers. Registration, vaccination records, what few there are, and the transfer documents. You sure about this?" Mara opened the folder. The horse's registered name was Ashford's Legacy, shortened to Ash in the records. 12 years old, like Dutch had said. Thoroughbred crossed with something called a Träkener, a German warm blood, according to the notes. Previous owner, Martin Ashford, deceased. But it was the next line that made Mara's breath catch. Military Registry, DOD-K9/EQ-U-1-987-4471. Below that, stamped in faded red ink, property of U.S. Department of Defense, Experimental Breeding Program, Fort Carson Station. Mara's hands began to shake. "Mara?" Sheila's voice seemed to come from very far away. "You okay?" She wasn't okay. She was the opposite of okay, because she'd seen those letters before, DOD-K9/EQU, in James's things, in the documents he'd been collecting in the months before he died, documents he'd hidden in the attic, stuffed into an old ammunition box like they were dangerous, like they were proof. "I need to make a call," Mara heard herself say. "Phone's on the wall." But Mara didn't move. She was staring at the registration papers, at the faded stamp, at the date, 1987, 36 years ago. The experimental breeding program would have been shut down decades ago. Whatever horses had been part of it should have been dispersed, sold off, forgotten. So why was one of them still alive? And why had someone just tried to buy it out from under her? "Mara, seriously, are you—" "I'm fine," Mara said, her voice stronger now. She closed the folder and tucked it under her arm. "I'll get a trailer. Thank you, Sheila." She walked out before the other woman could respond. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows across the auction yard. Most of the crowd had dispersed, leaving only a few stragglers loading animals into trailers or haggling over last-minute deals. Mara found Ash in a holding pen near the back, separated from the other horses. He stood in the far corner, head low, that ruined leg cocked at an angle that had to be agony. But when Mara approached the fence, his head came up, ears swiveling forward, those dark eyes fixed on her. "Hey," she said softly. "Remember me?" The horse snorted, a wet, rattling sound. He didn't move closer, but he didn't move away either. Mara climbed carefully over the fence, ignoring the protest of her bad knee, a souvenir from a car accident years ago, and dropped into the pen. Ash tensed, muscles bunching like he was preparing to bolt or fight. She couldn't tell which. "Easy," Mara murmured. Easy. I'm not going to hurt you. She moved slowly, giving him time to adjust to her presence. The horse watched her with that unblinking intensity, weighing and measuring. Finally, when she was close enough to touch, he let out a long breath and lowered his head again. Mara reached out and let her fingers brush his neck. His coat was coarse and dirty, matted with old sweat and dried mud. She could feel his ribs beneath the skin, could see the network of scars that covered his body like a map of old violence. What happened to you? She whispered. Ash's ears flicked back, listening. Mara ran her hand along his shoulder, and that's when she saw it. The brand. It was hidden beneath a thick patch of matted hair on his left shoulder, almost invisible unless you knew to look. Mara's breath caught as she carefully brushed away the dirt and grime. There, burned into the skin, was a series of numbers and a symbol. 4, 4, 7, 1. And below it, a strange mark. 2 crossed lines with a circle at the intersection, almost like a surveyor's symbol or a military designation. Mara's heart was racing now. She pulled out her phone and snapped several photos, her hands shaking so badly she had to try 3 times to get a clear image. This was it. This was the connection. She didn't know what it meant yet, didn't know how it tied to James's death, or the documents in the attic, or the strange man at the auction. But she knew, with a certainty that felt like gravity, that she was standing at the edge of something vast and terrible. And there was no turning back now. Bucky. Getting Ash into a trailer turned out to be easier than expected, mostly because the horse seemed to understand that anywhere was better than where he'd been. Mara had called in a favor from one of the few people in Red Hollow who still spoke to her, a farrier named Hank Drummond who owed James money and had never paid it back. He showed up with a rusted 2-horse trailer and helped her load Ash with a minimum of drama. "You know this is crazy, right?" Hank said as they secured the trailer gate. "That horse is 3/4 dead already." "So am I," Mara said. "We'll figure it out together." Hank shook his head but didn't argue. He'd learned years ago that Mara Vance didn't change her mind once it was made up. The drive back up the mountain was slow and careful, Mara watching the trailer in her rearview mirror, half expecting it to tip over on every sharp turn. But Ash stood steady, his weight shifting with the motion of the truck, his dark head visible through the trailer's small window. By the time they reached the cabin, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of blood and copper. Mara backed the trailer up to the old barn, really just a lean-to with delusions of grandeur, and carefully unloaded her new charge. Ash limped down the ramp and into the small paddock Mara had hastily repaired that morning. He stood there for a long moment, head raised, nostrils flaring as he took in the scent of pine and stone and thin mountain air. Then he lowered his head and began to graze, pulling at the sparse grass with slow, methodical bites. Mara watched him from the fence, her chest tight. "What secrets are you carrying?" she whispered. The horse didn't answer, but somewhere in the distance, a raven called, a harsh, echoing sound that seemed to carry a warning. That night, Mara couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind claw at the cabin walls. Normally, the sound comforted her, a reminder that she was alone, separate, safe from the poison of human contact. But tonight, it sounded like whispers. Finally, around midnight, she gave up and went to the attic. The pull-down ladder creaked as she climbed, and dust motes swirled in the beam of her flashlight. The attic was cramped and cold, filled with boxes and old furniture, and the accumulated debris of 2 lives that had been building towards something before one of them ended. Mara made her way to the far corner where James's things were stored. She'd been through them 100 times in the 3 years since his death, searching for answers, for clues, for anything that would make sense of what happened. The official story was simple. James had been hiking in the mountains, had lost his footing on a steep trail, and had fallen to his death. His body had been found at the base of a cliff, broken and cold. Accidental death, the coroner's report said, consistent with a fall from height. But Mara knew her husband. James Vance didn't lose his footing. He didn't take stupid risks. And he sure as hell didn't go hiking in that particular section of the mountains, a restricted area near an old military installation, just for the fun of it. He'd been investigating something. And now, Mara was going to find out what. She pulled out the old ammunition box and set it on the dusty floor. Inside were the documents James had collected, photocopied reports, newspaper clippings, handwritten notes in his tight, careful script. Most of it, Mara had never fully understood. References to military programs, breeding experiments, something called Project Iron Horse. James had been convinced there was a connection to the old fort, that something was still going on up there, hidden from view. She thought he was becoming obsessed, paranoid even. Now she pulled out one of the photocopied documents and smoothed it flat. It was a requisition order from 1987 requesting specialized equine subjects for enhanced performance trials. The letterhead read, Department of Defense, Advanced Research Projects Division, Fort Carson Station. And there, in the middle of the page, was the same symbol she'd seen branded on Ash's shoulder. 2 crossed lines with a circle at the intersection. Mara's hands were shaking as she dug deeper into the box. More documents, more references to the breeding program, to experimental bloodlines, to horses being retired from active service. But nothing about what happened to those horses afterward. Nothing about where they went, or why one of them had ended up at a county auction, half dead and branded with secrets. She was about to close the box when her fingers brushed against something at the very bottom, a small envelope she didn't remember seeing before. Mara pulled it out. The envelope was yellowed with age, sealed with tape that had gone brittle. Her name was written on the front in James's handwriting. For Mara. If something happens. Her breath caught. Her hands were shaking so badly now she could barely open the envelope. Inside was a single piece of paper folded twice. She unfolded it and began to read. Mara, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it back. I'm sorry. I know I promised you answers, and I hate that I'm leaving you with more questions instead. But I need you to know something. I wasn't crazy. Everything I've been digging into, the program at Fort Carson, the breeding experiments, the horses, it's real. And it's still operational. They shut it down officially in 1989, but the facility never closed. It just went dark. Private funding, black budget, whatever you want to call it. Someone is still running experiments up there, and they're using those horses. I don't know exactly what they're doing, but I found records of horses being disposed of when they outlived their usefulness. Except some of those horses didn't die. They were sold off quietly, scattered across the country, their records scrubbed. I think they're trying to hide the evidence, to erase any trace of what was done. There's a man you need to find if something happens to me. His name is Daniel Reese. He worked at Fort Carson in the 80s, maintenance crew, not part of the program itself, but he saw things. He tried to blow the whistle and got buried for it. Last I heard, he was living somewhere in Colorado, off the grid. If you can find him, he might have answers. I love you, Mara. I'm sorry I dragged you into this, but if I'm gone, it means they're willing to kill to keep this quiet. Don't let them win. James Mara read the letter 3 times, each word burning itself into her memory. Then she folded it carefully, slipped it back into the envelope, and sat there in the cold attic, tears streaming down her face. Don't let them win. I won't, she whispered to the darkness. I promise. The next morning dawned cold and clear. Mara woke before sunrise, her body stiff from falling asleep on the attic floor. She climbed down, made coffee she wouldn't drink, and went out to check on Ash. The horse was standing in the paddock, his breath misting in the frigid air. When he saw Mara, his ears pricked forward. Not friendly exactly, but aware. Interested. Morning, Mara said softly. She climbed over the fence and approached slowly, a bucket of grain in one hand. Ash eyed the bucket warily but didn't retreat. When Mara set it down and stepped back, he limped forward and lowered his head to eat. While he was distracted, Mara ran her hands carefully over his body, checking for injuries, for anything she might have missed. His right foreleg was worse than she'd thought. Not just swollen, but deformed, the bone healed badly from an old break. It would never be fully sound again. But he was alive. Against all odds, all logic, he was still alive. Who did this to you? Mara murmured. What did they make you do? The horse's only answer was the rhythmic crunch of grain. Mara's fingers found the brand again, traced the numbers and the symbol. She thought about James's letter, about the breeding program, about horses being disposed of. Ash should be dead. The fact that he wasn't meant something had gone wrong, or right, depending on how you looked at it. Someone had failed to erase this piece of evidence, and now it was standing in Mara's paddock, eating grain and breathing cold mountain air, a liability, a witness, a target. As if summoned by the thought, a vehicle came into view on the access road below, a dark SUV moving slowly up the mountain. Mara's stomach clenched. She watched as the SUV navigated the switchbacks, its windows tinted black, its purpose unmistakable. It was coming here. To her. Mara climbed out of the paddock and walked back to the cabin. She retrieved James's old rifle from the closet, a bolt-action Winchester that she'd never actually fired, and checked to make sure it was loaded. Then she stood on the porch and waited. The SUV pulled into her driveway 5 minutes later, gravel crunching under its tires. The engine cut off, and for a long moment, nothing happened. Then the driver's door opened. The man who stepped out was the same one from the auction. Neat dark hair, boardroom face, costume cowboy clothes. He smiled when he saw Mara standing there with the rifle. "Mrs. Vance," he called out, his voice pleasant and cold. "We should talk." "Get off my property," Mara said. The man raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I just want to make you an offer." "I'm not interested." "You haven't heard it yet." He took a step closer. "The horse you bought yesterday? I'll give you $5,000 for it. Right now, cash." Mara's grip tightened on the rifle. "No." "10,000." "No." The man's smile never wavered, but something shifted in his eyes, a flicker of impatience, of calculation. "Mrs. Vance, let me be frank. That animal is worthless to you. It's crippled, it's old, and it's going to cost you more money than you have just to keep it alive. Whereas I can offer you enough money to live comfortably for quite some time. It's a generous offer." I said no. "Why?" The question was sharp now, the pleasant mask slipping. "Why do you want it? What do you think you're going to do with a half-dead horse?" Mara met his gaze steadily. "That's my business." For a long moment they stood there, the wind cutting between them, the rifle barrel glinting in the morning sun. Then the man sighed and shook his head. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly. "A bad one." "I've made worse?" "I don't think you understand what you're getting into." "Then maybe you should explain it to me." The man studied her, his expression unreadable. Then he reached into his jacket, slowly, carefully, and pulled out a business card. "When you change your mind," he said, holding it out, "call me." Mara didn't move to take it. After a moment, the man walked forward and placed the card on the porch railing. Then he turned and walked back to the SUV. Before he got in, he paused and looked back at her. "Your husband was a stubborn man too," he said. "Look where it got him." The words landed like a physical blow. Mara's finger found the rifle's trigger, her vision narrowing to the man's face. "What did you say?" But he was already climbing into the SUV, already starting the engine. The vehicle reversed, turned, and disappeared down the mountain road, leaving nothing but dust and the lingering stink of exhaust. Mara stood there for a long time, her heart hammering, the rifle shaking in her hands. Then she walked to the porch railing and picked up the business card. It was plain white, no company logo, no address, just a name and a phone number. Marcus Webb. She turned the card over. On the back, written in neat handwriting, was a single line. "Some things should stay buried." Mara stared at the words until they blurred. Then she went inside, found a box of matches, and burned the card to ashes. The next few days passed in a strange, suspended quiet. Mara divided her time between caring for Ash and researching everything she could find about Project Iron Horse, Fort Carson Station, and the DoD breeding program. Most of what she found was heavily redacted or classified, but there were fragments, congressional hearing transcripts, FOIA requests, a few academic papers about military animal programs during the Cold War. Project Iron Horse had officially ended in 1989, its budget absorbed into other programs. The stated goal had been to develop enhanced equine specimens for specialized military applications, whatever that meant. But one name kept appearing in the documents, Dr. Eleanor Kane, the program's lead researcher. Mara searched for her but came up empty. No obituary, no current address, nothing. It was like she'd vanished into smoke after the program shut down. Or been disappeared. Mara also tried to track down Daniel Reese, the man James had mentioned in his letter. But that search was even more futile. No phone number, no address, no digital footprint at all. If he was still alive, he was invisible. On the third night, Mara was in the barn changing Ash's leg wraps when she heard a vehicle approaching again. Her stomach dropped. She grabbed the pitchfork leaning against the wall and moved to the barn door, her heart racing. But this time, the vehicle was a battered pickup truck, not a sleek SUV. And the man who climbed out was Sheriff Frank Howell, Red Hollow's long-suffering law enforcement, who looked about as comfortable being on Mara's ridge as a fish in a tree. "Mara!" he called out, his hands raised to show he was unarmed. "Can we talk?" Mara lowered the pitchfork slightly. "About what?" "About the fact that you had a visitor a few days ago. Marcus Webb." Mara's blood went cold. "How do you know that?" Frank sighed and walked closer. He was in his late 50s, his face weathered and tired, his eyes carrying the weight of a man who'd seen too much and helped too little. "Because he filed a complaint," Frank said. "Said you threatened him with a rifle. He was trespassing. He also said you seem unstable, paranoid. He's worried you might hurt yourself or someone else." Mara laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Is that what he told you?" "Mara, did he also tell you why he was here? Did he tell you he tried to buy Ash for $10,000? Did he tell you he threatened me?" Frank's expression tightened. "He said he made you a fair offer, and you refused. Look, I'm not here to arrest you or take your guns or anything like that. I'm checking on you, making sure you're okay." "I'm fine." "You don't look fine. And you don't look like someone who believes Marcus Webb's story," Mara shot back. Frank was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed and rubbed his face. "No," he admitted. "I don't. I think something's off about that guy. But I can't prove anything, and unless you want to file a counter-complaint, I don't. Then my hands are tied." Mara studied him. Frank Howell was a decent man as far as small-town sheriffs went. He'd been kind to her after James died, had tried to investigate when she'd insisted it wasn't an accident. But eventually, he'd given up, moved on, closed the case, just like everyone else. "Did you know my husband was investigating Fort Carson?" Mara asked suddenly. Frank's expression went carefully blank. "Mara, did you?" "I knew he had theories about what happened up there." "They weren't theories, Frank. They were facts. And someone killed him to keep him quiet." "You don't know that." "Yes, I do." Mara's voice was steady now, cold and certain. "And I'm going to prove it." Frank looked at her for a long time. Then he shook his head. "Don't," he said quietly. "Whatever you think you're on to, let it go. James tried to fight this and it got him killed. Don't make the same mistake." "So you do believe me?" "I believe that there are things in this world that don't want to be found," Frank said, "and people who will do anything to keep them hidden. I don't want to find your body at the bottom of a cliff too, Mara. Please, let it go." He turned and walked back to his truck before she could respond. Mara watched him drive away, his taillights disappearing into the darkness. Then she went back into the barn, where Ash was waiting, his dark eyes watching her. "We're on our own," she told the horse. Ash snorted softly, as if he'd known that all along. Part 2 lưu ý, viết 6.000 đến 6.500 từ liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện, pha hồi thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước, không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới. Liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch. Sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần. Duy trì chủ đề, tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ, phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ, Hoa Kỳ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc. Kế theo ngôi thứ 3, giữ đồ kịch tính không viết lan man, kết thúc phần không giới thiệu phần sau. Câu chuyện không nhắc đến Chúa. Lưu ý trả lời trong mục tin nhắn không nhảy sang document. Chi dần bắt buộc, không được xuất hiện trong nội dung truyền. Đây là một câu chuyện điện ảnh hoàn toàn hư cấu được tạo ra chỉ nhằm mục đích giải trí, không đề cập hay ngụ ý rằng nó dựa trên sự kiện có thật, người thật hoặc câu chuyện có thật. Không sử dụng các cụm từ như dựa trên một câu chuyện có thật, theo ghi chép hoặc bất cứ điều gì tương tự. Tất cả các nhân vật, địa điểm, tổ chức và sự kiện phải hoàn toàn hư cấu. Show more 8 giờ 52 phút, Part 2. The mountains had a way of keeping secrets. Mara had learned that long before James died, back when she was young enough to believe that silence meant peace instead of burial. Now, standing in the pre-dawn darkness of her barn, watching Ash's labored breathing create ghosts in the freezing air, she understood that some secrets refused to stay buried. They clawed their way up through stone and soil, demanding to be heard. And sometimes they came branded on the shoulder of a dying horse. 2 weeks had passed since Sheriff Howell's visit. 2 weeks of waiting for something to happen. Another visit from Marcus Webb. Another veiled threat. Another accident that wasn't really an accident. But the mountain had remained quiet, wrapped in the kind of stillness that felt more like anticipation than peace. Mara didn't trust it. She'd spent those weeks nursing Ash back from the edge, coaxing weight onto his bones, treating the infected wounds that had been allowed to fester for months. The horse was stubborn and difficult, prone to snapping at her hands when the pain got too bad, but there was an intelligence in his eyes that kept her coming back. He understood what she was doing, and more than that, he seemed to understand why. On the 15th morning, Mara woke to find fresh tire tracks in the dirt road leading to her cabin. Not from the main access road, but from the old logging trail that wound up through the pine forest on the north side of the ridge. The tracks were deep, suggesting a heavy vehicle, and they circled her property line before disappearing back into the trees. Someone had been watching her house in the middle of the night. Mara stood at the edge of the tree line, her rifle slung over her shoulder, studying the tracks. They were fresh, maybe 4 or 5 hours old at most. Whoever had made them had been careful to stay just outside her property, technically legal, practically menacing. The message was clear. We know where you are. We're watching. She turned and walked back to the cabin, her jaw set. If they wanted to scare her into selling Ash, into giving up and disappearing, they were going to be disappointed. She'd lived with fear for 3 years now. It had become as familiar as the wind, as constant as the cold. What they didn't understand was that fear stopped working when you had nothing left to lose. Inside the cabin, Mara pulled out James's ammunition box again and spread the contents across the kitchen table. The letter he'd written still sat on top, its edges worn from how many times she'd read it. There's a man you need to find. Daniel Reese. She'd been searching for him online for days with no success. But there was another option, one she'd been avoiding because it meant reaching out, meant trusting someone, meant admitting she couldn't do this alone. Mara picked up her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in over a year. The line rang 4 times before a gruff voice answered. Yeah? Hank, it's Mara Vance. A pause. Mara, didn't expect to hear from you again. I need help. Another pause, longer this time. Hank Drummond was the kind of man who measured his words carefully, who'd learned through hard experience that commitment was a debt that always came due. What kind of help? The kind that might get you in trouble. Hank laughed, a dry, humorless sound. Hell, Mara, I've been in trouble since the day I was born. What do you need? I need to find someone. A man named Daniel Reese. He used to work at Fort Carson Station back in the 80s. James thought he knew something about what was going on up there. The line went quiet. Mara could hear Hank breathing, could almost feel him weighing the risk of getting involved. Why? He asked finally. Because James was right, and because someone's trying real hard to make sure I don't figure out what he was right about. The horse? The horse is part of it, but it's bigger than that. Hank sighed. All right, give me a couple of days. I know some people who know people. If this Reese guy's still alive and in Colorado, I'll find him. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. And Mara, be careful. People who dig into military black sites tend to have short life expectancies. I noticed, Mara said quietly. She hung up and stared at the document spread across the table. The photocopied requisition forms, the newspaper clippings about Project Iron Horse, the grainy photograph of Fort Carson Station that James had printed from some declassified archive. The facility sat high in the mountains, accessible only by a single narrow road that wound through federal land. In the photo, it looked abandoned, broken windows, sagging roof lines, chain-link fences strangled by weeds. But Mara knew better now. Abandoned places didn't send men like Marcus Webb to buy horses at country auctions. Abandoned places didn't leave fresh tire tracks on logging roads at 3 in the morning. Fort Carson Station was alive, and it was watching her. The question was, what was she going to do about it? That afternoon, Mara was in the barn mucking out Ash's stall when she heard another vehicle approaching. Her hand went instinctively to the rifle she now kept propped against the wall. But when she peered out the barn door, she recognized the battered sedan immediately. Dr. Sarah Chen had been Red Hollow's only veterinarian for the past decade, a transplant from Denver who'd come looking for quiet and found loneliness instead. She was in her early 40s, whip-smart and perpetually exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes that suggested too many late-night emergency calls and not enough sleep. Mara had called her 3 days ago, asking her to come check on Ash. Sarah had said she'd try to make it when she could. Apparently when she could was now. "Mara," Sarah called out, climbing out of her car with a worn medical bag in hand. "Sorry it took so long. Had a breech birth at the Morrison Ranch that turned into a whole thing." "It's fine. Thanks for coming." Sarah walked into the barn and stopped short when she saw Ash standing in his stall. "Jesus. This is the horse you bought at auction?" "Yeah." "Mara, he's—" Sarah shook her head. "He's in bad shape." "I know. That's why I called you." Sarah set down her bag and approached the stall carefully. Ash's ears went back, his eyes tracking her movement with suspicion. "Easy, big guy. I'm just going to take a look." It took 20 minutes of gentle coaxing before Sarah could get close enough to conduct a proper examination. Mara watched from the corner, her arms crossed, trying not to see the deepening concern on the vet's face as she worked. Finally, Sarah stepped back and wiped her hands on her jeans. Her expression was grim. "How honest do you want me to be?" she asked. "Completely. That leg is never going to be sound again. The bone healed badly, probably broke months ago and was never properly set. He's got chronic malnutrition, several poorly healed lacerations, and what looks like old burn scars on his right flank." She paused. "Mara, this horse has been through hell. I don't know what kind of life he had before, but it wasn't good." "Can you help him?" Sarah hesitated. "I can treat the infections, get him on a proper nutrition plan, manage his pain, but the leg, there's only so much I can do. He'll always be lame, and even with treatment, I'd say he's got maybe a year, 2 at most." Mara nodded slowly. "Do it. Whatever he needs." "Mara, I need to be clear about costs. This isn't going to be cheap. Between medications, supplements, ongoing care, you're looking at several $100s a month minimum." "I don't care." "You should. I know money's tight for you right now." "I said I don't care." Mara's voice was harder than she intended. She took a breath and softened it. "He deserves better than what he got. I can at least give him that." Sarah studied her for a long moment. Then she nodded. "All right, I'll get him started on antibiotics and anti-inflammatories today. Come by the clinic tomorrow, and I'll give you everything else you'll need." "Thank you." Sarah began packing up her equipment, but she kept glancing at Mara with an expression that suggested she wanted to say something else. Finally, she did. "Why this horse?" she asked. "I know you, Mara. You're not sentimental. You don't do things without a reason. So why spend money you don't have on an animal that's already halfway to the grave?" Mara looked at Ash, who was watching them both with those unblinking dark eyes. "Because he knows something." "Knows something? Mara, he's a horse." "I know what he is." Mara pulled out her phone and showed Sarah the photo she'd taken of Ash's brand. "You ever seen a marking like this?" Sarah squinted at the screen. "It's a military brand. Old one, looks like." "Where'd he come from?" "That's what I'm trying to find out." Understanding dawned on Sarah's face. "This is about James, isn't it? About what he was investigating before he died." Mara didn't answer. Sarah sighed and handed the phone back. "Mara, I liked James. He was a good man, but chasing shadows isn't going to bring him back." "I'm not chasing shadows. I'm chasing the truth." "And what if the truth gets you killed too?" "Then at least I'll know I tried." Sarah shook her head but didn't argue further. She finished packing her bag and headed for the door. But before she left, she turned back one more time. "Be careful," she said quietly. "Whatever you're digging into, people are going to notice, and not all of them are going to be friendly about it." "I know," Mara said. "They've already started." After Sarah left, Mara spent the rest of the afternoon treating Ash according to the vet's instructions. The horse tolerated the medications with surprising patience, as if he understood they were meant to help. When she was finished, Mara stood in the stall, running her hands along his neck, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. "What did they do to you?" she whispered. "What were you part of?" Ash's only answer was to lower his head and rest his muzzle against her shoulder. The gesture was so unexpected, so gentle, that Mara felt tears prick her eyes. She'd been alone for so long, had convinced herself she preferred it that way. But standing there in the dim barn with a broken horse leaning against her, she realized how much she'd missed simple connection, simple trust, even if it came from an animal who'd survived the same kind of hell she had. 3 days later, Hank called. "Found him," he said without preamble. "Daniel Reese lives in a cabin outside Leadville, about 2 hours south of here. Keeps to himself. Doesn't have a phone, doesn't have internet, doesn't want to be found." Mara's heart raced. "How'd you track him down?" "Let's just say I know a guy who knows a guy who owed me a favor. Reese buys supplies at a general store in town once a month. Always pays cash, always alone." "Did you talk to him?" "Hell no. I'm not sticking my neck out that far. But I got his address." Hank paused. "You sure you want to do this, Mara? This guy went off the grid for a reason. He might not appreciate visitors." "I don't care what he appreciates. I need to know what he knows." "Then you're going to have to go there yourself. And Mara, if anyone asks, I didn't help you with this." "Understood. Thank you, Hank." "Don't thank me. Just don't get yourself killed, all right? I already feel guilty enough about James." The line went dead before Mara could respond. She stared at the address Hank had texted her. Leadville was a 4-hour round trip, which meant leaving Ash alone for most of a day. She didn't like the idea, not with Marcus Webb's people circling like vultures. But this was the first real lead she'd had, the first concrete step toward understanding what James had died for. She couldn't let it slip away. The next morning, Mara loaded her truck with supplies: water, food, the rifle, and the ammunition box containing James's documents. She spent an hour reinforcing the paddock fence and leaving extra feed and water for Ash. The horse watched her preparations with what looked like suspicion, his ears swiveling nervously. "I'll be back before dark," Mara told him. "I promise." She climbed into her truck and started the engine. As she pulled out of the driveway, she caught a glimpse of Ash in her rearview mirror, standing at the fence, watching her go. It felt like leaving family behind. The drive to Leadville took her deeper into the mountains, along winding roads that cut through pine forests and alongside sheer drops into valleys still touched with morning shadow. The landscape was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way, the kind of beauty that could kill you if you weren't careful. Mara understood that kind of beauty, had lived in it long enough to respect it. Leadville itself was a faded mining town, clinging to the slopes like a drunk to a bar rail, still standing, still breathing, but only just. Mara drove through the main street, past boarded-up storefronts and weathered Victorian houses, until she reached the general store Hank had mentioned. She parked and went inside. The store was dim and cluttered, smelling of dust and old wood and something that might have been mouse droppings. An elderly man sat behind the counter reading a paperback western with water-stained pages. "Help you?" he asked without looking up. "I'm looking for Daniel Reese." That got his attention. He lowered the book and studied her with rheumy blue eyes. "Don't know anyone by that name?" "I think you do. I think he comes in here once a month to buy supplies." "Lady, I get a lot of customers. Can't remember all their names." Mara pulled out a $20 bill and laid it on the counter. The old man glanced at it, then at her. "What do you want with him?" he asked. "That's between me and him. He doesn't like visitors. I'll take my chances." The old man sighed and pocketed the 20. "He's got a cabin about 10 miles up County Road 7. Look for the turnoff marked with a stack of stones. Place is set back in the trees, easy to miss if you don't know what you're looking for." He paused. "Fair warning, he's got a shotgun and he knows how to use it." "So do I," Mara said. She drove back out of town and found County Road 7 without much trouble. The road was rough, more dirt and gravel than pavement, winding through dense forest that blocked out most of the sunlight. She drove slowly, watching for the marker. Almost missed it anyway. The stack of stones was small and weathered, half hidden by underbrush. Mara pulled over and studied the narrow track that led off into the trees. It didn't look like a driveway so much as a deer path, but tire tracks were visible in the dirt, faded but present. She turned onto the track. The cabin appeared suddenly, materializing from the shadows like it had been waiting for her. It was small and rough-hewn, built from logs that had gone gray with age. Smoke rose from a metal chimney. A battered pickup truck sat in the clearing, its bed full of firewood. And on the porch, sitting in a rocking chair with a shotgun across his knees, was an old man who looked like he'd been carved from the same stone as the mountains. Mara stopped her truck and killed the engine. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then she opened the door and stepped out, her hands visible and empty. "Daniel Reese," she called out. "Depends who's asking." His voice was rough as sandpaper, worn down by years of silence. "My name is Mara Vance. My husband was James Vance. He died 3 years ago investigating Fort Carson Station." The old man's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Recognition. And maybe something else. Grief. "I remember James," he said quietly. "Good man. Asked the right questions. And got killed for it." "Yeah, he did." Mara took a step closer. "I need to know what he was trying to find. I need to know what's up at that facility." Daniel was silent for a long time. Then he stood, the shotgun still in his hands but pointed at the ground. "You should go home, Mrs. Vance. Forget about Fort Carson. Forget about whatever your husband told you. Go home and live your life." "I can't do that." "Why not?" "Because I bought one of their horses." That stopped him cold. His grip on the shotgun tightened. "You what?" "At an auction 2 weeks ago. Black horse, 12 years old, branded with a military registry number and that symbol, the crossed lines with the circle. I think it came from the breeding program. I think it's evidence of what they're still doing up there." Daniel's face had gone pale. He stared at her like she'd just told him she'd brought a bomb into his clearing. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he said, his voice shaking. "Do you have any idea how much danger you're in?" "I'm starting to get a sense of it. That's why I'm here. I need to know what I'm fighting." Daniel shook his head slowly. "You're not fighting anything, Mrs. Vance. You're already dead. You just don't know it yet." He turned and walked toward his cabin. Mara thought he was going to go inside and shut the door in her face, but instead, he paused at the threshold and looked back. "You coming?" he asked. "Or are you just going to stand there until they find you?" Mara didn't need to be asked twice. She followed him inside. The cabin was sparse and clean, furnished with the bare minimum: a table, 2 chairs, a wood stove, a cot against the far wall. Maps covered one wall, some topographic, some hand-drawn. But it was the photographs that caught Mara's attention. They were tacked up above the table, dozens of them, black and white images of horses. Not ordinary horses, but massive, powerful animals with something wrong in their eyes. Something too intelligent, too knowing. "These are from the program?" Mara asked. Daniel nodded. He set the shotgun against the wall and gestured for her to sit. Project Iron Horse. Started in 1982, officially shut down in 1989. The goal was to create enhanced horses for military applications. Faster, stronger, more resilient. They experimented with selective breeding, hormones, even genetic manipulation before most people knew what that meant. What kind of applications? Cavalry units in difficult terrain. Reconnaissance. Pack animals for special forces. The brass thought they could create the perfect military mount, an animal that could survive conditions that would kill a normal horse. Mara thought of Ash, thought of his scars and his broken leg and the burn marks on his flank. Did it work? Daniel's expression darkened. Too well. The horses they produced were incredible. Stronger than they should have been. Faster. But there were problems. Behavioral issues. Aggression. Some of them went completely feral, killed their handlers. And the genetic modifications, they had side effects. Shortened lifespans. Organ failures. Cancers. So they shut it down. Officially, yes. Unofficially? Daniel walked to the wall of photographs and touched one, a magnificent black stallion with a white blaze. They just moved it underground, private funding, black budget, same facility, different name. They've been running experiments up there for over 30 years, breeding these horses, studying them, trying to perfect the formula. And when they fail, they dispose of them, usually through a bullet, sometimes by selling them quietly to buyers who don't ask questions. He turned to look at her. The horse you bought should have been killed. Someone screwed up, and now they're going to want it back. Mara's stomach clenched. How do you know all this? Because I worked there. I was part of the maintenance crew. I saw what they did to those animals. I saw the ones that went mad, the ones that had to be put down because their own bodies were destroying them. His voice broke. I tried to report it, tried to go to the press. Within a week, my house was burned down. My wife left me. I lost everything. So I came here and I've been hiding ever since. Why didn't they kill you? Because I didn't have proof, just stories. And stories don't matter without evidence. He looked at her hard. But a living horse with a military brand? That's evidence. That's something they can't explain away. Mara felt the weight of what she'd stumbled into settling on her shoulders like wet concrete. What do I do? Get rid of the horse, sell it back to them, take the money and disappear. It's the only way you survive this. I can't do that. Why the hell not? Because my husband died trying to expose this. Because those animals deserve better. And because if I give up now, James died for nothing. Daniel stared at her. Then slowly he started to laugh, a broken, bitter sound. You're as stubborn as he was, he said finally. You know that? I've been told. He walked to a cabinet and pulled out a metal box, similar to the one James had kept his documents in. He opened it and removed a thick folder. These are copies of everything I managed to smuggle out before they caught on to me. Breeding records, experimental protocols, photos, names. He held it out to her. It's not enough on its own to shut them down, but combined with a living horse with physical proof, it might be enough to force an investigation. Mara took the folder, her hands shaking. Why are you giving this to me? Because I've been sitting on it for 30 years, too scared to do anything with it. And maybe it's time someone did. He met her eyes. But understand this, Mrs. Vance, the moment you go public with this, they're going to come for you, and they won't send another polite man with a briefcase. They'll send someone who makes problems disappear permanently. Let them come, Mara said quietly. Daniel nodded slowly. Your husband said the same thing, right before they killed him. The drive back to Red Hollow was a blur of white-knuckled tension and racing thoughts. Mara kept checking her rear-view mirror, half expecting to see a black SUV following her. But the road behind her remained empty. By the time she pulled into her driveway, the sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of blood and fire. Mara grabbed the folder Daniel had given her and hurried to the barn. Ash was exactly where she'd left him, standing at the fence. When he saw her, his ears pricked forward and he let out a low nicker. Relief flooded through her. Hey boy, I'm back, just like I promised. She fed him, checked his wounds, and spent an hour in the barn just sitting with him, feeling the steady warmth of his presence. In the folder on her lap were the tools to destroy the people who'd created him, who'd used him, who'd tried to erase him. All she had to do was figure out how to use them without getting killed. As if in answer to her thoughts, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You went to see Daniel Reese today. That was a mistake. Mara's blood went cold. She stared at the message, her mind racing. They'd been watching her, following her, knew exactly where she'd been and who she'd talked to. A second message appeared. Last chance. Sell us the horse. Walk away. Or we'll make you. Mara's hands clenched around the phone. Then, very deliberately, she typed a response. Come and take him. She hit send and waited. The response came almost immediately. We will.
Part 3. Lưu ý. Viết 6.000 đến 6.500 từ liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện và hồi thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới, liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch, sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần. Duy trì chủ đề, tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ, phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ, Hoa Kỳ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc.
Kể theo ngôi thứ 3, giữa đầu kịch tính không Việt lan man, kết thúc phần không giới thiệu phần sau, câu chuyện không nhắc đến Chúa. Lưu ý trả lời trong mục tin nhắn không nhảy sang document, chỉ dẫn bắt buộc, không được xuất hiện trong nội dung truyền. Đây là một câu chuyện điện ảnh hoàn toàn hư cấu được tạo ra chỉ nhằm mục đích giải trí, không đề cập hay ngụ ý rằng nó dựa trên sự kiện có thật, người thật hoặc câu chuyện có thật. Không sử dụng các cụm từ như dựa trên một câu chuyện có thật, theo ghi chép hoặc bất cứ điều gì tương tự. Tất cả các nhân vật, địa điểm, tổ chức và sự kiện phải hoàn toàn hư cấu. Show more 8:55, Part 3. Mara didn't sleep that night. She sat in the kitchen with the lights off, the rifle across her lap, watching the driveway through the window. Every shadow looked like movement. Every sound of wind through the pines became footsteps. The darkness pressed against the glass like something alive, patient and hungry. They would come. The only question was when. Dawn broke cold and gray, the sun hidden behind a wall of clouds that turned the sky the color of old bruises. Mara's eyes burned from lack of sleep, her muscles stiff from hours of sitting motionless. She stood, stretched, and made coffee she wouldn't drink. The ritual as empty and necessary as prayer. Outside, Ash stood in his paddock, his breath misting in the frigid air. He looked stronger than he had 2 weeks ago. The wounds were healing, the weight was coming back. But that ruined leg still canted at an angle that made Mara's own knee ache in sympathy. She walked out to feed him, the rifle slung over her shoulder now, a permanent extension of her body. Ash nickered softly when he saw her, limping to the fence with an eagerness that felt almost like joy. "Morning," Mara murmured, running her hand along his neck. The brand on his shoulder had become familiar now, a mark she could trace with her eyes closed. 4471, a number that meant something to someone, a number worth killing for. She was pouring grain into his feed bucket when she heard the sound of an engine on the access road. Her hand froze. Ash's ears swiveled toward the sound, his body tensing. Mara's first instinct was to grab the rifle and take cover, but something stopped her. The engine sound was wrong, not the smooth purr of Marcus Webb's SUV, but the rattling growl of something older, something dying. She walked to the front of the cabin and watched as a rust-eaten pickup truck crested the final switchback and pulled into her driveway. The driver's door opened and Sarah Chen climbed out, her medical bag in hand and exhaustion written across her face like scars. "Sarah," Mara said, lowering the rifle slightly, "what are you doing here?" "Making a house call." Sarah walked closer, her eyes taking in the rifle, the dark circles under Mara's eyes, the tension in her posture. "You look like hell. I feel worse. When's the last time you slept?" "Does it matter?" Sarah sighed. "Mara, I'm worried about you. You've been acting paranoid, jumpy. People in town are talking." "Let them talk. They're saying you're having some kind of breakdown, that you're seeing conspiracies where there aren't any." "That maybe you should..." "Should what?" Mara's voice went hard. "Get help? Take medication? Let them convince me I'm crazy so I'll stop asking questions?" Sarah held up her hands. "I'm not the enemy here. I'm trying to help." "Then believe me. Believe that something's wrong. That James didn't die in an accident. That the people who killed him are watching me right now, waiting for an excuse to finish what they started." Sarah studied her for a long moment. Then she set down her medical bag and crossed her arms. "Show me." "What?" "Show me the proof, the evidence. Whatever it is that's got you convinced there's some massive conspiracy. Because right now, all I see is a grieving widow who spent 3 years looking for someone to blame." The words stung, sharp and precise as surgical cuts. But beneath the sting was something else. A challenge. An opening. Mara turned and walked into the cabin. After a moment's hesitation, Sarah followed. Inside, Mara pulled out the ammunition box and Daniel Reese's folder. She spread the contents across the kitchen table. The documents, the photographs, the breeding records, the experimental protocols. Years of secrets laid bare in the weak morning light. "This," Mara said, "is Project Iron Horse, a military breeding program that was supposed to end in 1989 but didn't. They've been running experiments at Fort Carson Station for over 30 years, creating horses with genetic modifications, testing them until they break, then disposing of the evidence." Sarah picked up one of the photographs. Her face went pale. "What happened to this horse?" she whispered. "Experimental hormone therapy. According to the notes, it developed aggressive tumors within 6 months. They put it down." Mara pulled out another photo. "This one went feral, killed 2 handlers, shot on sight." Another. "This one's organs failed, died in its stall." Sarah flipped through the documents, her hands shaking slightly. If this is real, it's real. And Ash, the horse I bought at auction, he's one of them. He has the brand, the registry number, everything. He's living proof that the program never stopped. But how did he end up at a county auction? Someone made a mistake. Or maybe someone with a conscience let him slip through. Either way, they want him back. Bad enough to threaten me. Bad enough to follow me to Daniel Reese's cabin yesterday. Sarah looked up sharply. They followed you? Mara showed her the text messages. Sarah read them, her expression growing darker with each word. You need to go to the police, she said finally. And tell them what? That I have documents about a secret military program? That I'm being threatened by people I can't identify? Frank Howell already thinks I'm unstable. He'll dismiss it, file a report that goes nowhere, and then I'll be even more exposed. Then go to the press. Take this to a newspaper, a TV station, someone who can... And risk getting Jamesed before the story even runs? Mara shook her head. No, I need more than documents. I need the facility itself. I need to get inside and find proof they can't deny. Sarah stared at her like she'd lost her mind. You want to break into a military installation? It's not military anymore. It's privately funded, which means different security, different rules. It also means they can do whatever they want without oversight. Mara, this is insane. You'll get yourself killed. Maybe. Or maybe I'll get the truth. Mara's voice was steady, certain. Either way, I'm done hiding. Sarah was quiet for a long time, her eyes moving between the documents and Mara's face. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. When are you planning to do this? Soon, within the next few days before they escalate. You can't go alone. I don't have a choice. Yes, you do. Sarah took a breath. I'm coming with you. Mara blinked. What? You heard me. If you're going to do something this monumentally stupid, you're not doing it alone. Sarah, you don't have to. I know I don't have to, but I liked James, and I'm tired of watching good people get crushed by systems that don't give a damn about truth or justice. She met Mara's eyes. Besides, someone needs to patch you up when you inevitably get shot. Despite everything, Mara felt a smile tug at her lips. You really want to risk your life for this? I became a vet because I care about animals. If what's in these documents is true, then someone needs to stop it. Might as well be us. Mara felt something unfamiliar stir in her chest. Hope, maybe. Or just the simple relief of not being alone anymore. Thank you, she said quietly. Sarah nodded. Don't thank me yet. We still have to figure out how to actually get inside that place without getting killed. They spent the next 3 hours poring over the documents, mapping out what they knew. The facility was located deep in the mountains, accessible only by a single road that was almost certainly monitored. According to Daniel's notes, there were security cameras at the entrance, motion sensors along the perimeter, and armed guards on rotating shifts. But there was also a vulnerability. Look at this, Sarah said, pointing to one of Daniel's hand-drawn maps. There's a service entrance on the east side near the old mining road. It was used for supply deliveries back when the program was official. Daniel's notes say it was supposed to be sealed off after the shutdown, but if the facility is still operational, they'd need a way to bring in supplies without drawing attention, Mara finished. The main entrance would be too visible. Exactly. So if we could find that service entrance, we'd have a way in. Sarah leaned back in her chair. This is crazy. You know that, right? I know. And we could both end up dead. I know that too. Sarah laughed, a sharp, slightly hysterical sound. My mother was right. I should have become a dentist. Before Mara could respond, her phone buzzed. She tensed, expecting another threat from Marcus Webb or whoever was pulling his strings. But the number was Hank's. She answered. Yeah? Mara, we got a problem. Hank's voice was tight with something that sounded like fear. Someone was asking about you at the feed store this morning. Guy I didn't recognize. City clothes, expensive watch. He was showing your picture around, asking if anyone knew where you lived. Mara's blood went cold. What did they tell him? Most folks kept their mouths shut, but Jenny Morrison's kid, he's 17 and stupid, told the guy you lived up on the ridge above town. Damn it. There's more. I heard from a buddy who works highway maintenance, says there's been unusual activity on the old mining road that runs past Fort Carson. Heavy vehicles, middle of the night, like they're moving something. What kind of something? Don't know. But it's got the locals spooked. People are saying the facility is active again, that something big is happening up there. He paused. Mara, whatever you're planning, do it fast, because they know you're on to them and they're not going to wait much longer. I know. Thanks, Hank. She hung up and looked at Sarah. We're out of time. When? Tonight. Sarah's eyes widened. Tonight? Mara, we're not ready. We don't have a solid plan. We don't know what we're walking into. And if we wait, we might not get another chance. They're already asking about me in town. They know where I live. It's only a matter of time before they decide threatening isn't enough. Sarah opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. She knew Mara was right. All right, she said finally, tonight. But we do this smart. We scout the service entrance first, make sure it's viable. If it's too risky, we pull back and figure out another approach. Agreed. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Mara gathered supplies, flashlights, rope, a small first aid kit, the rifle, and as much ammunition as she could carry. Sarah brought medical equipment and a camera to document whatever they found inside. As the sun began to set, painting the mountains in shades of amber and shadow, Mara went out to check on Ash one last time. The horse stood at the fence, watching her approach with those knowing dark eyes. I have to go away for a while, she told him, running her hands along his neck. But I'm coming back. I promise. Ash pushed his muzzle against her chest, a gesture that felt almost like understanding, like he knew what she was about to do and why it mattered. Mara pressed her forehead against his and closed her eyes. You're worth it, she whispered. All of you are worth it. They left just after full dark, taking Sarah's sedan instead of Mara's more recognizable truck. The drive to Fort Carson Station took nearly an hour, winding through narrow mountain roads that were barely more than suggestions carved into stone. They passed no other vehicles, saw no lights except the cold, indifferent stars overhead. This is it, Sarah said, her voice tight, as she turned onto an overgrown track that barely qualified as a road. According to Daniel's map, the service entrance should be about half a mile up this way. They drove slowly, headlights off, navigating by moonlight and prayer. The forest pressed close on both sides, branches scraping against the car like skeletal fingers. Finally, Sarah stopped. We walk from here. They climbed out into the freezing night. Mara's breath came out in clouds. She could hear the wind moving through the trees, a sound like whispered warnings. They moved through the forest on foot, following the old mining road. The ground was rough and uneven, littered with rocks and fallen branches. Twice Mara nearly twisted her ankle, but they kept moving, driven by momentum, and the knowledge that turning back now meant surrendering everything. The facility appeared suddenly, a dark mass against the darker mountainside. It was bigger than Mara had expected, a sprawling complex of buildings surrounded by chain-link fence topped with razor wire. Lights burned in some of the windows. Security cameras swept the perimeter in slow mechanical arcs. There, Sarah whispered, pointing. The service entrance was exactly where Daniel's map said it would be. A heavy steel door set into the side of a concrete building, half hidden by overgrown vegetation. A faded sign above it read, Authorized personnel only. They approached carefully, watching for cameras, for motion sensors, for any sign they'd been detected. But this section of the facility seemed abandoned, forgotten. The camera nearest the door hung at an odd angle, its lens cracked and dark. Mara tried the door handle, locked, as expected, but the lock was old, corroded. She pulled out the crowbar she'd brought and wedged it into the frame. Wait, Sarah hissed. If there's an alarm, then we'll know in about 10 seconds. Mara threw her weight against the crowbar. Metal shrieked. The lock gave way with a crack that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet. They froze, waiting for sirens, for shouts, for the sound of running feet. Nothing. Just the wind and their own ragged breathing. Let's go, Mara said. They slipped inside. The interior was dark and smelled of mold and old concrete. Mara clicked on her flashlight, the beam cutting through the blackness to reveal a long corridor lined with rusted pipes and peeling paint. Water dripped somewhere in the distance, a steady, rhythmic sound that echoed off the walls. This way, Sarah said, consulting the map. The main facility should be through that door at the end. They moved quickly but carefully, their footsteps muffled by years of accumulated dust. The corridor ended at another door, this one newer, with an electronic keypad lock. Mara's heart sank. Can you bypass it? Sarah examined the lock, then pulled out a small multi-tool. Maybe. Give me a minute. While Sarah worked, Mara kept watch, her hand tight on the rifle. Every shadow looked like movement. Every sound became threat. Then, with a soft beep, the lock disengaged. "Got it," Sarah whispered. They pushed through the door and found themselves in a different world. The decay of the service corridor gave way to sterile white walls, fluorescent lights, and the hum of climate control systems. This part of the facility was modern, maintained, active. And somewhere in the distance, Mara could hear voices. They moved deeper into the complex, following Sarah's instincts and Daniel's map. The corridor branched off into smaller hallways, each one lined with doors marked with numbers and cryptic abbreviations. Through windows in some of the doors, Mara caught glimpses of laboratories, medical equipment, computers displaying data she didn't understand. Then they turned a corner, and Mara stopped dead. Through a large observation window, she could see into a massive stable area. Dozens of horses stood in individual stalls, each one fitted with monitoring equipment, heart rate sensors, cameras, what looked like IV lines running into their necks. The animals were magnificent, powerfully built, their coats gleaming under the harsh lights, but their eyes were wrong, dull and empty, like something essential had been hollowed out. "Sweet, merciful hell," Sarah breathed. "How many are there?" "At least 30, Mara said, her voice shaking. "Maybe more." She raised the camera and started taking photos, documenting everything. The horses, the equipment, the monitoring stations, evidence that couldn't be denied or explained away. Then she saw the records room. It was adjacent to the stable, visible through another window. Filing cabinets lined the walls. Computers sat on desks, and on one of the screens, clearly visible even from a distance, was a document labeled Disposition Protocol, Phase 7. "I need to get in there," Mara said. "Mara, we don't have time." That's the proof. Those records. Without them, these photos could be explained away as anything. Sarah cursed under her breath, but she nodded. "Make it fast." The door to the records room was unlocked, a piece of carelessness that felt like a gift. Mara slipped inside and made straight for the computer. The screen was still active, logged into some kind of database. Her hands flew over the keyboard, opening files, taking photos of everything she could. Breeding records, experimental protocols, mortality rates that made her stomach turn. And there, buried in a subfolder labeled Asset Disposal, she found it. A list of horses marked for termination. Ash's registry number was on it, fourth from the top. Date scheduled 3 weeks ago. But someone had added a handwritten note in the margin. Sold. County auction. Tracking. They'd been tracking him. Tracking her. Knew exactly where Ash was from the moment she'd bought him. Which meant this had all been a trap. The realization hit her like cold water. They'd let the horse go deliberately, knowing someone would buy him, knowing that person would start asking questions. And then they'd watched, waited, cataloged every move while deciding how to handle the problem. Mara grabbed a flash drive from her pocket and jammed it into the computer, copying everything she could. The files were massive, the transfer agonizingly slow. "Mara?" Sarah's voice came from the doorway, tight with fear. "Someone's coming. 10 more seconds. We don't have 10 seconds." The sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor, getting closer. Voices. Multiple people. The transfer completed. Mara yanked out the flash drive and ran for the door. They slipped into the corridor just as a group of people rounded the corner behind them. 2 men in security uniforms and a woman in a white lab coat. One of the guards saw them immediately. "Hey, stop!" Mara and Sarah ran. The facility became a maze of identical corridors, all white walls and fluorescent lights that made it impossible to tell direction. Behind them, the shouts grew louder, joined by the wail of an alarm. "This way!" Sarah gasped, pulling Mara down a side corridor. They burst through a door and found themselves in what looked like a medical bay. Examination tables, cabinets full of supplies. And on the far wall, another door marked exit. They ran for it just as the guards crashed into the room behind them. "Stop or we'll shoot!" Mara didn't stop. She hit the exit door at full speed, Sarah right behind her, and they tumbled out into the freezing night air. They were on the far side of the facility now, nowhere near where they'd parked Sarah's car. Searchlights swept the grounds. More shouts, the sound of dogs barking. "The fence!" Sarah panted, pointing to where the chain link ran along the edge of the property. "If we can get over it..." They sprinted across open ground, completely exposed. Mara's lungs burned. Her bad knee screamed, but she kept running. Behind them, a shot cracked through the night. The bullet hit the ground 3 feet to Mara's left, kicking up dirt and stone. They reached the fence and scrambled up, fingers finding purchase in the chain link. The razor wire at the top tore at Mara's jacket, her hands. Blood ran down her palms, hot against the freezing metal. Another shot, closer this time. They dropped over the fence and into the forest beyond, branches tearing at their faces as they crashed through the undergrowth. No time for stealth now, just speed, just survival. The sounds of pursuit faded behind them as the forest swallowed them whole. They ran until they couldn't anymore, until their lungs gave out and their legs turned to water. They collapsed against a fallen log, gasping, bleeding, alive. Did we get it? Sarah managed between breaths. The files? Mara pulled out the flash drive, held it up in the moonlight. We got it! Sarah started to laugh, a wild, exhausted sound. We're insane! You know that? I know. They sat there in the dark forest, listening to the distant sound of search parties, knowing they'd just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. But Mara felt something she hadn't felt in 3 years. Not peace, not safety, but purpose. They made it back to Sarah's car 2 hours later, following the mining road by moonlight and instinct. Every sound made them freeze. Every shadow became threat. But the pursuit had turned inward. The facility's security focused on locking down the breach rather than hunting them through miles of wilderness. By the time they reached Sarah's sedan, both of them were covered in scratches, bleeding from a dozen cuts, shaking with adrenaline and cold. Sarah started the engine and they drove in silence, too exhausted for words. It wasn't until they were back on the main road, miles from Fort Carson, that either of them spoke. What now? Sarah asked. Mara clutched the flash drive like a talisman. Now we make sure everyone knows what they've been hiding. And if they come for us? They're already coming, Mara said quietly. But this time we'll be ready. Part 1. Lưu ý. Viết 6.000 đến 6.500 từ liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện. Pha hồi thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước, không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới, liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch. Sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần. Duy trì chủ đề, tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ, phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ, Hoa Kỳ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc. Kể theo ngôi thứ 3, giữ đồ kịch tính không viết lan man, kết thúc phần không giới thiệu phần sau. Câu chuyện không nhắc đến Chúa. Lưu ý trả lời trong mục tin nhắn không nhảy sang document, chỉ dẫn bắt buộc, không được xuất hiện trong nội dung truyện. Đây là một câu chuyện điện ảnh hoàn toàn hư cấu được tạo ra chỉ nhằm mục đích giải trí, không đề cập hay ngụ ý rằng nó dựa trên sự kiện có thật, người thật hoặc câu chuyện có thật. Không sử dụng các cụm từ như dựa trên một câu chuyện có thật, theo ghi chép hoặc bất cứ điều gì tương tự. Tất cả các nhân vật, địa điểm, tổ chức và sự kiện phải hoàn toàn hư cấu. Showmore 857, Part 4. Dawn was breaking when they reached Mara's cabin, the sky bleeding from black to bruised purple. Sarah's sedan rattled up the final switchback, its engine coughing like a dying man. Neither woman had spoken for the last hour, both of them processing what they'd seen, what they'd stolen, what it meant. Mara climbed out first, every muscle in her body screaming. Her hands were still bleeding from the razor wire, her jacket torn in a dozen places. But she was alive. They both were. That wouldn't last long once the people at Fort Carson realized what was on that flash drive. Come inside, Mara said quietly. We need to figure out our next move. Sarah followed her into the cabin, moving like someone twice her age. She collapsed into a chair at the kitchen table while Mara went to check on Ash. The horse was standing at the fence, agitated, his ears swiveling toward every sound. When he saw Mara, he let out a shrill whinny that sounded almost like relief. I know, she murmured, running her shaking hands along his neck. I know. It's been a hell of a night. Bam. Back inside, she found Sarah staring at the flash drive like it might explode. We need to copy this, Sarah said. Multiple copies, cloud storage, physical backups. If they find us before we can get this out, I know. Mara grabbed her laptop and plugged in the drive. The files began transferring, megabytes of evidence crawling across the screen. breeding records, medical experiments, mortality reports, and photographs, dozens of them, showing horses in various states of suffering, their bodies marked with injection sites and surgical scars. Sarah leaned over Mara's shoulder, scrolling through the images. Her face went pale. "This one's just a foal," she whispered, pointing to a photo of a young horse, maybe 6 months old, its legs splinted and its eyes glazed with pain. "They're experimenting on babies." Mara's jaw tightened. "Keep looking. We need to know everything that's on here before we decide how to use it." They spent the next 2 hours combing through the files, building a picture of an operation that was far worse than either of them had imagined. Project Iron Horse hadn't just continued after its official shutdown. It had metastasized, grown into something darker and more ambitious. The experiments had expanded beyond simple breeding programs into genetic manipulation, hormone therapies, neural implants designed to enhance obedience and performance, and the mortality rate was staggering. Of the 347 horses logged in the database over the past decade, only 62 were still alive. The rest had been disposed of, euthanized, incinerated, erased. "They're treating them like lab rats," Sarah said, her voice hollow, "like they're not even alive." Mara found the file labeled Disposition Protocol and opened it. Her stomach turned as she read. Horses that failed to meet performance benchmarks were marked for termination, but some were sold instead, scattered to auctions and dealers across 3 states, their records scrubbed, their brands obscured or removed. Insurance, the document called it. A way to dispose of evidence while maintaining plausible deniability. Ash had been one of those horses, marked for disposal, then quietly sold when someone decided a bullet would raise too many questions. But they'd made a mistake. They'd left the brand intact. "Look at this," Mara said, pulling up another file. It was a spreadsheet tracking the sold horses, listing their auction dates, locations, and buyer information. Most of the buyers were listed as unknown or private sale. But 3 names stood out. One of them was Martin Ashford, the man who'd owned Ash before he died. Another was a woman named Rebecca Kane. Mara's breath caught. "Kane, like Dr. Eleanor Kane, the program's lead researcher." Sarah leaned closer. "Think they're related?" "Has to be. Too much of a coincidence otherwise." Mara clicked on the name, but there was no additional information. Just a notation. Deceased 2024, a year ago. "We need to find out who she was," Mara said. "If she bought one of these horses, she might have had the same questions we do, might have found something we can use. Or she might have gotten killed for asking," Sarah pointed out. "Either way, we need to know." Before they could dig deeper, Mara's phone rang. The sudden sound made them both jump. Mara looked at the screen. Unknown number. Her hand hesitated over the answer button. "Could be them," Sarah whispered. "Could be." Mara answered anyway, putting it on speaker. "Yeah?" A woman's voice, cool and professional. "Mrs. Vance, my name is Patricia Aldrich. I'm an attorney representing the parties whose property you and Dr. Chen illegally accessed last night." Mara's blood went cold. They knew Sarah's name, knew exactly who'd been there. "I don't know what you're talking about," Mara said carefully. "Please don't insult my intelligence. We have you on camera. We have tire tracks from Dr. Chen's vehicle. We have more than enough evidence to have you both arrested for breaking and entering, theft of proprietary information, and industrial espionage. Proprietary information about illegal experiments on animals." A pause. When Patricia spoke again, her voice was harder. "I'm calling to offer you a way out of this situation. My clients are willing to overlook last night's incident and compensate you generously for any distress caused by their security measures. In exchange, you return the files you stole, sign a non-disclosure agreement, and cease any further investigation into their operations. And if we refuse, then you'll be facing criminal charges by the end of the day. Your home will be searched, your assets frozen, and that horse you're so attached to? He'll be seized as evidence and returned to his rightful owners." Mara looked at Sarah, saw the fear in her eyes. But beneath the fear was something else. Anger, the same cold fury that Mara had been carrying for 3 years. "Tell your clients to go to hell," Mara said. "Mrs. Vance, you killed my husband because he got too close to the truth.
You've been torturing animals for decades, hiding behind black budgets and private funding, and now you think you can threaten me into silence? Mara's voice was steady, cold. I've got every file from your database, every photo, every record of every horse you've murdered, and I'm going to make sure the whole world sees it. Silence on the other end. Then Patricia's voice came back, stripped of its professional veneer, revealing something uglier beneath. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Then maybe it's time I found out. Mara hung up. Sarah stared at her. We just declared war on people who have unlimited resources and no accountability. I know. They're going to come for us with everything they have. I know that too.
Mara looked at the flash drive, which is why we need to move fast. We get this information to someone who can't be bought or intimidated, someone with a platform big enough that they can't silence it. Who? Mara thought for a moment. Then she remembered something James had said once, years ago, back when he'd first started investigating. He'd mentioned a journalist in Denver, a woman who'd built her career on exposing government corruption and corporate malfeasance, someone who didn't back down when threatened. Catherine Reeves, Mara said. She works for the Denver Post, investigative reporting. If anyone will run this story, she will. Sarah pulled out her phone and started searching. After a moment, she found a contact page on the newspaper's website. Got her email and an office number. Should we call first? No, they might be monitoring our phones by now. We drive to Denver and hand-deliver everything. Today? Right now. Mara, that's a 5-hour drive. If they're watching the roads, then we take back roads. We switch cars. We do whatever we have to do. Mara stood, her decision made. But we're not sitting here waiting for them to come and take this from us. Sarah nodded slowly. All right, let me go home and grab some things. Clean clothes, more medical supplies. Meet back here in an hour? Make it 30 minutes. I don't think we have much time. After Sarah left, Mara moved quickly, gathering everything she'd need for the trip. Copies of the flash drive files burned to multiple disks, the original documents from James's ammunition box, clean clothes, money, the rifle. And then she went out to see Ash. The horse was calmer now, grazing on the sparse grass, his movements still hampered by that ruined leg. When Mara approached, he lifted his head and nickered softly. I have to leave again, she told him, running her hands through his mane. And this time, I don't know when I'm coming back. Ash pushed his muzzle against her chest, a gesture she'd come to recognize as comfort, or maybe understanding. If something happens to me, Mara continued, her voice breaking slightly, Sarah will take care of you. I've already talked to her. You'll be safe. But even as she said it, she knew it was a lie. None of them would be safe until this was over, until the truth was out and the people responsible were held accountable. She pressed her forehead against Ash's neck, breathing in his scent, hay and earth, and something wild that no amount of captivity could erase. You survived everything they did to you, she whispered. You're stronger than all of them. Don't forget that. Sarah returned 23 minutes later, driving a different car, a nondescript Honda that belonged to her sister. Less recognizable, she explained. Less likely to be flagged if they had people watching. They transferred their supplies and prepared to leave. Mara took one last look at her cabin, at the mountain ridge that had been her sanctuary for 3 years. Part of her knew she might never see it again, that this journey could end with her body at the bottom of a cliff, just like James. But she'd made her choice, and she was done being afraid. They were pulling out of the driveway when Sheriff Frank Howell's truck appeared on the access road, moving fast. He pulled up blocking their exit, climbed out with his hand resting on his service weapon. Going somewhere, Mara? He asked. Out of your jurisdiction, Frank, so unless you're planning to arrest me for something specific, you need to move your truck. Frank's jaw tightened. I got a call this morning from some fancy lawyer in Denver. Said you and Sarah broke into private property last night. Said there's a warrant being issued for your arrest. There is no warrant, Mara said calmly, because they can't get one without explaining what we found, and they really don't want to explain that. What did you find? Mara held up the flash drive. Proof of everything James suspected, everything he died trying to expose. Frank stared at the drive like it was a live grenade. Mara, don't do this. Whatever's on there, it's not worth your life. It was worth James's life. It's worth mine. James is dead because he wouldn't listen to reason, because he thought he could fight powerful people and win.
Frank's voice cracked. I don't want to find your body, too. Then help us, Sarah said from the driver's seat. We're taking this to the press, to someone who can make sure it gets out. But we need time. If you want to help Mara, give us a head start before you report this conversation. Frank looked between them, his face torn. He was a good man trapped in an impossible situation, trying to balance duty and conscience. How much of a head start? He asked finally. 2 hours. That's all we need. Frank closed his eyes. When he opened them again, something had shifted in his expression. Decision. Or maybe just resignation. I came up here to check on a noise complaint, he said slowly. Took me about 30 minutes to verify there was nothing to worry about. Then I had to drive back down to town, file the paperwork, grab some lunch. He looked at his watch. All told, that's going to take me about 2.5 hours. Mara felt tears prick her eyes. Thank you, Frank. Don't thank me. Just be careful. And Mara, if you make it out of this alive, you come back here. You hear me? Red Hollow's your home. Don't let them take that from you, too. He climbed back in his truck and moved it out of their way. As they drove past, he raised one hand in a salute that looked more like a goodbye. The drive to Denver was tense and silent, both women watching the rearview mirror for signs of pursuit. They took Highway 285 south, then cut east on smaller roads, avoiding the main interstate. The November landscape rolled past, brown fields, skeletal trees, mountains giving way to plains. They were an hour outside Denver when Sarah's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and her face went pale. It's my clinic, she said. They never call unless it's an emergency. Don't answer it, Mara warned, but Sarah was already lifting the phone to her ear. This is Dr. Chen. Mara could hear the voice on the other end, male and urgent. Sarah's expression shifted from concern to horror. What? When? Is she? Sarah's hand trembled. I'm coming. I'll be there as soon as I can. She hung up and looked at Mara, her eyes wide with shock. My clinic. Someone broke in last night. Destroyed everything. All my equipment, my files, my medications, everything. Was anyone hurt? My assistant was working late. They beat her, put her in the hospital. Sarah's voice was shaking now. They said the men who did it were looking for me, asked where I was, what I was working on. Sarah, I'm so sorry. They're not just coming for us. They're going after everyone around us, everyone we care about. Sarah pulled over to the side of the road, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tight her knuckles were white. My assistant has 2 kids, Mara. She's 23 years old, and she's in the hospital because I helped you break into that facility. We can still turn around. We can... No. Sarah's voice was hard now, forged in sudden fury. No, we're not turning around. We're finishing this. Because if we don't, they'll just keep hurting people. They'll keep destroying anyone who gets in their way. She pulled back onto the road, driving faster now. They reached Denver just after noon, the city rising from the plains like a promise. Tall buildings, busy streets, thousands of people who had no idea what was coming. Sarah navigated through downtown traffic, while Mara tried to calm the racing of her heart. The Denver Post building was a modern structure of glass and steel near the Capitol. They parked in a nearby lot and sat in the car for a moment, both of them understanding that once they walked through those doors, there was no going back. You ready? Sarah asked. No, Mara said honestly, but let's do it anyway. They walked into the lobby, past security guards who barely glanced at them, and approached the reception desk. A young woman with a headset and a practiced smile looked up. Can I help you? We need to see Catherine Reeves, Mara said. It's urgent. Do you have an appointment? No, but tell her we have evidence of illegal government experiments on animals. Tell her it's related to Project Iron Horse. The receptionist's smile faltered. Let me see if she's available. She picked up the phone, spoke quietly into it. After a moment, she looked back at them with surprise. She says to come up. 6th floor, office 614. They took the elevator in silence, watching the numbers climb. When the doors opened on the 6th floor, they found themselves in a maze of cubicles and offices, reporters hunched over keyboards, phones ringing, the chaotic energy of a newsroom in full swing. Office 614 was at the end of the hall. The door was open, revealing a cramped space lined with filing cabinets and stacks of papers. Behind the desk sat a woman in her late 40s,
with iron gray hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun and eyes that had seen too much to be easily shocked. Catherine Reeves looked up as they entered. "You mentioned Project Iron Horse. I haven't heard that name in over a decade. How do you know about it?" "Because my husband died investigating it," Mara said, "and because I just broke into the facility where they're still running experiments." Catherine's eyebrows rose. She gestured to two chairs. "You better sit down and tell me everything." They did, starting with James's death and moving through Mara's purchase of Ash, the documents from Daniel Reese, the break-in at Fort Carson, and the files on the flash drive. Catherine listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. When they finished, she sat back in her chair and studied them. "You broke into a private facility, stole proprietary information, and are now being threatened by people with unlimited resources." She said it like she was confirming facts, not judging. "And you came to me because you think I'll publish a story that could get me sued into oblivion, or worse." "Yes," Mara said simply. "Show me the files." Mara handed over the flash drive. Catherine plugged it into her computer and began scrolling through the contents. Her expression grew darker with each passing minute. When she reached the photographs, she stopped and stared at the screen for a long time. "These are horses," she said quietly. "They're experimenting on horses." "For over 30 years," Sarah added, "with a mortality rate of over 80%. Catherine kept scrolling. When she reached the disposition protocols, she made a sound that might have been disgust or rage or both. "This is monstrous," she said. "Will you run the story?" Mara asked. Catherine looked at her. "If I run this, you understand what happens. The people behind this will come after all of us. They'll try to discredit the story, discredit you, maybe worse. Are you prepared for that?" "I'm prepared to do whatever it takes to make sure the truth gets out." "Even if it costs you everything?" "I've already lost everything that mattered," Mara said. "The only thing I have left is the truth." Catherine nodded slowly. "All right. I'll need time to verify these documents, reach out to sources, build a case that can't be easily dismissed. Give me 48 hours. We might not have 48 hours. Then you better find somewhere safe to hide until the story runs." Catherine ejected the flash drive and handed it back. "Keep the original. Make copies. Store them everywhere. And if anything happens to me, make sure someone else gets this." They stood to leave, but Catherine stopped them. "Mrs. Vance, your husband, James Vance, he reached out to me 6 months before he died. Sent me some preliminary information about Fort Carson, asked if I'd be interested in investigating. I told him I needed more evidence before I could run anything." Her voice was heavy with regret. "I've thought about that conversation a lot over the past few years. Wondered if things would have been different if I'd taken him seriously sooner." "You couldn't have known," Mara said. "No, but I should have tried harder." Catherine met her eyes. "I'm going to make this right. I promise you that." They left the building and walked back to Sarah's car in silence. The afternoon sun was bright and cold, casting long shadows across the pavement. Denver moved around them, oblivious, ordinary people living ordinary lives. Mara envied them. "Now what?" Sarah asked as they climbed into the car. "Now we find somewhere to lay low for 2 days while Catherine builds her story." "And hope they don't find us first." Mara's phone buzzed. Another text from an unknown number. She almost didn't look, but something made her check. The message was short, just 3 words and a photo. "We have him." The photo showed Ash standing in an unfamiliar stall, his eyes wide with fear. And standing next to him, one hand resting on the horse's neck in a mockery of affection, was Marcus Webb. Mara's vision went red. "They took him," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They went to my property and took Ash." Sarah grabbed the phone, looked at the photo. "Mara, we can't. I'm getting him back. That's what they want. They're using him as bait to lure you in." "I don't care." "Mara, listen to me." "No, you listen." Mara's voice was cold, final. "That horse survived everything they did to him. He survived when they wanted him dead. And I'm not leaving him to die alone in some cage while I hide and wait for a newspaper story." She looked at Sarah. "You don't have to come. This isn't your fight." "Like hell it isn't." Sarah started the engine. "Where are they holding him?" Another text came through, an address. Fort Carson Station. Of course. They wanted her to come to them, wanted to finish this on their terms, in their territory,
But Mara was done playing by their rules. "We need help," she said. "We can't do this alone." "Who?" Mara thought for a moment. Then she pulled out her phone and dialed Daniel Reese's number, the one Hank had given her weeks ago. The old man answered on the third ring. "Yeah?" "It's Mara Vance. They took my horse. They're holding him at Fort Carson." A long pause. "That's a suicide mission." "I know. I'm going anyway." Another pause. Then Daniel said something Mara didn't expect. "I'll meet you there." "Daniel, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. I've been hiding for 30 years, running from what I saw, what I knew, and every day I've hated myself a little more for my cowardice." His voice was steady now, clear. "Your husband had the courage I didn't. The least I can do is help you finish what he started." "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. We're probably all going to die." He gave her coordinates for a meeting spot 3 miles from the facility. 2 hours. Come armed. He hung up. Sarah looked at Mara. "Are we really doing this?" "Yes." "Then we're going to need more than rifles." They made one more stop before leaving Denver, a sporting goods store where Sarah knew the owner. The man asked no questions when Sarah requested ammunition, road flares, and 2 handheld radios. He just packed everything into bags and wished them luck. They drove north as the sun began to set, the mountains rising before them like a wall of shadow. Somewhere up there, in a facility built on secrets and suffering, Ash was waiting. And Mara was coming for him, no matter what it cost. Part 5. Lưu ý. Viết 6.000 đến 6.500 từ liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện, pha hồi thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước, không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới. Liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch, sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần. Duy trì chủ đề, tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ. Phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ, Hoa Kỳ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc. Kể theo ngôi thứ 3, giữ đồ kịch tính không viết lan man, phần 5 giải quyết hết vấn đề và kết thúc trọn vẹn câu chuyện. Câu chuyện không nhắc đến Chúa, lưu ý trả lời trong mục tin nhắn không nhảy sang document, chỉ dân bắt buộc, không được xuất hiện trong nội dung truyền. Đây là một câu chuyện điện ảnh hoàn toàn hư cấu được tạo ra chỉ nhằm mục đích giải trí. Không đề cập hay ngụ ý rằng nó dựa trên sự kiện có thật, người thật hoặc câu chuyện có thật. Không sử dụng các cụm từ như dựa trên một câu chuyện có thật, theo ghi chép hoặc bất cứ điều gì tương tự. Tất cả các nhân vật, địa điểm, tổ chức và sự kiện phải hoàn toàn hư cấu. Showmore 901, Part 5. The meeting point was an abandoned ranger station 3 miles from Fort Carson, hidden in a grove of pines that had grown wild over decades of neglect. Daniel Reese was already there when they arrived, standing beside an old Ford truck that looked like it had survived 2 wars and a flood. He'd aged in the weeks since Mara had seen him, or maybe it was just the weight of what they were about to do settling onto shoulders that had carried too much for too long. "You came," Mara said, climbing out of Sarah's Honda. "Said I would." Daniel's eyes moved to Sarah. "You the vet?" "Sarah Chen." "You know how to shoot?" "I know how to not shoot myself. That's about it." Daniel almost smiled. "That puts you ahead of most people." He walked to the back of his truck and pulled out a duffel bag. Inside were 3 hunting rifles, boxes of ammunition, and what looked like climbing rope. "We're not going in through the front door this time. They'll be expecting that." "Then how?" Mara asked. Daniel unfolded a hand-drawn map, spreading it across the truck's tailgate. The facility was marked in detail, every building labeled, every entrance noted. But what caught Mara's attention was a section on the north side, marked with red ink. "Ventilation shaft," Daniel explained, "runs from the old mine tunnels underneath the facility up to the surface. They use it for air circulation in the lower levels where they keep the horses. It's not meant for people, but it's big enough if you don't mind tight spaces." How do you know it's still there?" "Because I helped install it in 1987, and because bureaucrats never update infrastructure unless something breaks." He looked at them both. "This shaft comes up inside the stable complex. If your horse is there, we can reach him, but we'll have maybe 10 minutes before security realizes what's happening." "And getting out?" Sarah asked. "That's the hard part. Once we're inside, every exit will be locked down. We'll have to fight our way out or find another route." "Or die trying," Mara said quietly. Daniel nodded.
or die trying. They spent the next hour preparing, checking weapons, dividing supplies. Daniel moved with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before, though Mara suspected it had been decades since he'd needed to. Sarah was quieter, her hands shaking slightly as she loaded her rifle, but there was determination in her eyes that hadn't been there before. As the sun disappeared behind the mountains and darkness settled over the forest like a shroud, they climbed into Daniel's truck and drove the final 3 miles. No headlights, just moonlight and memory guiding them along abandoned logging roads that hadn't seen traffic in years. The entrance to the mine shaft was exactly where Daniel had marked it, a concrete bunker half buried in earth and overgrown with vegetation. The heavy steel door was locked, but Daniel produced a set of bolt cutters from his truck. "They changed the locks after I left," he said, cutting through the chain. "But they didn't reinforce the door. Amateurs." The door swung open with a shriek of rusted metal that made them all freeze, listening for any sign they'd been heard. But the night remained quiet, except for wind and the distant hoot of an owl. Inside, the shaft descended at a steep angle, concrete walls giving way to raw stone. The air was cold and damp, smelling of minerals and decay. They moved single file, Daniel in front with a flashlight, Mara in the middle, Sarah bringing up the rear. The descent seemed to last forever, the shaft narrowing in places until they had to turn sideways to squeeze through. Water dripped from the ceiling. Something small and chittering fled from their light. And with every step deeper, Mara felt the weight of the mountain pressing down, felt the certainty that they were walking into a trap. But she kept moving, because somewhere above them, Ash was waiting, and she'd made him a promise. The shaft finally leveled out, opening into a horizontal tunnel that ran beneath the facility. Daniel paused, consulting his map by flashlight. "Access point should be about 50 yards ahead," he whispered. "Ladder going up. Should bring us out in a utility room adjacent to the stables." They moved forward, the tunnel so narrow now that Mara's shoulders brushed both walls. Her rifle caught on protruding rock, her boots splashed through puddles that soaked her feet. But ahead, she could see where the tunnel ended, a vertical shaft with an ancient metal ladder bolted to the wall. Daniel tested the ladder carefully, his weight making the old metal groan. "It'll hold, but one at a time." He started climbing. Mara counted the seconds, listening to his progress echo down the shaft. Finally, a thump from above. Then Daniel's voice, barely audible. "Clear. Come up." Mara went next, the rifle slung across her back, her hands finding purchase on rungs that were slick with condensation and rust. She climbed 20 feet, 30, the darkness absolute except for the faint glow from Daniel's flashlight above. Her bad knee protested with every step, sending jolts of pain up her leg. But she kept climbing. Daniel's hand reached down, pulled her up the final few feet, into a cramped utility room filled with pipes and electrical panels. The air was warmer here, carrying the smell of animals and hay. They were inside. Sarah emerged from the shaft a moment later, her face pale but determined. Daniel was already at the door, listening. From beyond came the sounds Mara remembered from their first break-in, the mechanical hum of ventilation systems, the distant whinny of horses, footsteps somewhere far off. "Stay close," Daniel whispered, "and if shooting starts, don't hesitate. These people aren't going to arrest you. They're going to kill you and disappear your bodies." He opened the door. The corridor beyond was dimly lit, utilitarian. They moved quickly, Daniel navigating from memory, taking turns that seemed random, but clearly weren't. Twice they had to freeze as security guards passed nearby, their radios crackling with routine chatter. But the guards were bored, complacent, not expecting trouble from inside their own facility. They reached the stable complex without being seen. The observation window Daniel had shown them on the map gave a view into a massive room filled with horses, dozens of them, each in an individual stall, each monitored by equipment that blinked and hummed. But unlike the last time Mara had seen this place, the animals weren't dull-eyed and sedated. They were agitated, moving restlessly, sensing something wrong. And in the far corner, in a stall separate from the others, stood Ash. Mara's breath caught. The horse looked smaller somehow, diminished by captivity. His head hung low, that ruined leg cocked at an angle. But he was alive. "There," she whispered, pointing. Daniel studied the room. 2 guards, one at the entrance, one making rounds. "We take them quietly, get your horse, and get out before anyone notices." How are we supposed to move a lame horse through mine shafts? Sarah asked. We're not. We'll have to use one of the vehicle bays. Daniel pointed to another corridor. There's a loading dock on the east side. They use it for supply deliveries. If we can get there, get a truck. That's a lot of ifs, Sarah said. You have a better plan? Before anyone could answer, alarms erupted throughout the facility. Loud, piercing, unmistakable. Red lights began flashing in the corridors. They'd been discovered. Move! Daniel shouted, abandoning stealth. They burst through the door into the stable complex. The guard at the entrance spun, reaching for his weapon. Daniel didn't hesitate. He fired once, the shot echoing like thunder in the enclosed space. The guard went down. Horses screamed, rearing in their stalls, the sound primal and terrifying. The second guard came running, but Sarah, sweet, gentle Sarah, who'd said she barely knew how to shoot, put him down with 2 shots that were purely instinct and adrenaline. Mara ran for Ash's stall, her hands fumbling with the latch. The horse backed away, eyes rolling white with fear. It's me, Mara said, her voice somehow steady despite the chaos. It's me, boy. We're getting you out of here. Ash's ears swiveled forward. Recognition flickered in his eyes. He took a cautious step forward, then another, until his muzzle pressed against Mara's chest. Good boy, she whispered. Come on. She led him out of the stall just as more guards poured into the stable. Daniel and Sarah opened fire, forcing them back into the corridor. But there were too many, and more coming. The loading dock! Daniel shouted over the gunfire. Go! They ran, Ash limping alongside Mara, the horse's fear giving him speed despite the damaged leg. Behind them, shouts and gunfire echoed through the facility. They burst through a set of double doors into a vehicle bay where 3 trucks sat waiting. Daniel ran for the nearest one, yanked open the door. The keys were in the ignition, a piece of carelessness that felt like providence. Get him loaded, Daniel started the engine. Sarah dropped the truck's tailgate while Mara coaxed Ash up the ramp. The horse balked, terrified of the enclosed space, but Mara pulled harder, her voice fierce. I didn't come this far to lose you now. Move! Ash scrambled into the truck bed just as guards appeared in the doorway. Bullets sparked off metal. Sarah screamed and went down, clutching her shoulder. Sarah! Mara jumped into the truck bed, grabbed the vet, and hauled her up. I'm okay, Sarah gasped. Through and through. Keep moving. Daniel threw the truck into gear and slammed the accelerator. They crashed through the bay's roll-up door in an explosion of metal and glass into the freezing night air. Behind them, the facility erupted like a kicked anthill. Guards running, vehicles starting, searchlights sweeping. Daniel drove like a man possessed, the truck skidding around corners, bouncing over rough terrain. Bullets shattered the rear window. Ash went to his knees, then struggled back up, his eyes wild. Hold on to him, Daniel shouted. Mara wrapped her arms around the horse's neck, holding on as the truck bucked and swayed. Sarah was beside her, one hand pressed to her bleeding shoulder, the other gripping the side rail. 2 black SUVs roared out of the facility in pursuit, their headlights cutting through the darkness. They were faster, better equipped, gaining ground. We're not going to make it, Sarah yelled. Daniel didn't answer. He just drove harder, the old truck's engine screaming. They hit the main road and he turned sharply, heading not toward town but deeper into the mountains. What are you doing? Mara shouted. Buying you time. The SUVs were right behind them now, so close Mara could see the drivers' faces. One of them pulled alongside, trying to force them off the road. Daniel swerved, clipped the SUV's front quarter panel, sent it spinning into the ditch. But the second SUV kept coming. They rounded a sharp curve, and suddenly there were headlights ahead. Another vehicle blocking the road. Daniel hit the brakes, the truck sliding sideways. They were trapped. The SUV behind screeched to a stop. Doors opened. Armed men emerged, weapons raised. But the vehicle blocking the road ahead wasn't another enemy. It was Sheriff Frank Howell's truck. And standing beside it, illuminated by the headlights, was Frank himself. He wasn't alone. Behind him stood at least a dozen people from Red Hollow. Ranchers, shop owners, people Mara had thought had given up on her. Hank Drummond was there. Sheila from the auction office. Even old Dutch Carraway, the auctioneer, holding a shotgun that looked older than he was. Lower your weapons, Frank's voice carried authority that had nothing to do with his badge. You're trespassing in my county, threatening my people. The armed men from Fort Carson hesitated, uncertain. They'd been prepared to chase down fugitives, not confront an armed citizen militia. "This doesn't concern you, Sheriff," one of them called out. "These people are criminals." "These people are my responsibility," Frank shot back, "and you're the ones who are going to leave, now." A standoff. Two groups facing each other across 30 feet of mountain road, both armed, both committed. The tension stretched like wire about to snap. Then Catherine Reeves stepped into the light. She'd arrived in an unmarked sedan accompanied by two people with cameras. The lights from their equipment suddenly illuminated the scene with harsh, undeniable clarity. "I'm Catherine Reeves with the Denver Post," she announced, her voice carrying. "We're live streaming this to 10,000 viewers and counting. Everything you do from this moment on is being recorded and broadcast. So I'd suggest you think very carefully about your next move." The man from Fort Carson looked at the cameras, at the growing crowd, at Frank's determined face. His hand moved to a radio on his belt. Mara watched him, every muscle tense, waiting for the moment this went from standoff to slaughter. But the moment never came. The man spoke into his radio, listened to the response, then lowered his weapon. "Fall back," he ordered his team. "We're done here." They retreated to their vehicle and drove away, disappearing into the darkness. But Mara knew this wasn't over. Not really. They were just changing tactics, regrouping. Frank walked over to the truck, looked at Mara and Sarah and the trembling horse between them. "You all right?" he asked. "Sarah's shot," Mara said. "We need a hospital." "Already called for an ambulance. Should be here in 10 minutes. He looked at Ash. "This the horse all the fuss is about?" "Yeah." Frank studied the animal for a long moment, then he nodded. Figured he'd have to be something special. "Come on, let's get you folks somewhere safe." The next 48 hours passed in a blur. Sarah was treated at the county hospital. The bullet had passed clean through her shoulder, missing bone and major arteries. Painful, but survivable. She was released the next day with her arm in a sling and strict orders to rest. Mara stayed at Frank's house. Ash stabled at a nearby ranch whose owner owed Frank more favors than he could count. Daniel disappeared again, fading back into whatever shadows he'd emerged from, his part in this finished. And Catherine Reeves worked. The story broke online first, spreading through social media like wildfire. By morning, it had been picked up by national outlets. By afternoon, congressional offices were fielding calls demanding investigations. By evening, federal agents had descended on Fort Carson Station. The facility tried to deny everything at first, called the documents fabricated, the photographs staged, the whole story a conspiracy theory. But then Catherine produced the flash drive contents, verified by 3 independent forensic experts, produced testimony from Daniel Reese, produced the live stream footage of armed men from the facility pursuing civilians, and she produced Ash, with his brand and his scars and his medical records that told a story of decades of abuse. The denials fell apart like wet paper. Within a week, Fort Carson Station was shut down pending investigation. The horses were seized by federal authorities, placed in the care of animal welfare organizations. Arrests were made. Facility administrators, researchers, the private equity firm that had been funding the operation. Marcus Webb disappeared. So did Patricia Aldrich. But their names were on enough documents that warrants were issued. Eventually, they'd surface. Eventually, they'd face consequences. Or maybe they wouldn't. The world was full of powerful people who slipped through cracks. But at least the horses were safe. 2 weeks after the story broke, Mara received a visit at Frank's house. A federal investigator, mid-40s, with the careful manner of someone who'd seen too much corruption to be surprised by anything anymore. "Mrs. Vance, I wanted to update you on our investigation into your husband's death." Mara's breath caught. "You reopened the case?" "We did. And based on new evidence discovered at Fort Carson, we believe James Vance was murdered. He'd gotten too close to exposing the operation. We found emails between facility administrators discussing him as a problem that needed resolution. The investigator's expression was grim. "I'm sorry we didn't see it sooner. Will anyone be charged?" "We're building the case now. It's complicated. The people directly responsible are hard to identify, but we'll pursue it as far as we can." It wasn't justice. Not really. But it was acknowledgement. It was truth. James hadn't been crazy, hadn't been paranoid. He'd been right, and he'd been killed for it. "Thank you," Mara said quietly, "for telling me." After the investigator left, Mara drove to the ranch where Ash was being kept. The horse had gained weight in the past 2 weeks, his coat beginning to shine, his eyes clearer. The leg would never heal completely, but he could move without obvious pain now. He nickered when he saw her, limping to the fence with something that looked almost like joy. "Hey, boy," Mara murmured, running her hands along his neck. "We did it. We actually did it." Ash pushed his muzzle against her shoulder, breathing softly. "I've been thinking," Mara continued, "about what happens next. The federal government wants to take you, put you in some kind of sanctuary, keep you as evidence for the trials." She paused. "But I asked if I could keep you instead. Told them you'd been through enough, that you deserved a real home." The horse's ears swiveled forward, listening. "They said yes, on the condition that you receive proper veterinary care and regular check-ins." Mara smiled. "So I guess you're stuck with me." That evening, Catherine Reeves called. "Mara, you should see this." "See what?" "The response to the story. We've received over 2,000 emails in the past week. Half of them are from people thanking you for exposing this. The other half are from people who want to help." "Help how?" "Donations. Enough to build a proper sanctuary for the rescued horses. Enough to fund their care for years." Catherine's voice was warm. "And several large animal welfare organizations have offered to partner with you if you want to run it." Mara sat down, overwhelmed. "Me? Run a sanctuary? You're the one who saved them. You're the one who refused to give up. Seems fitting you'd be the one to give them a future." After hanging up, Mara sat in Frank's kitchen, staring at nothing. A sanctuary. A place where the horses could heal, could live out their years in peace instead of pain. A place built from truth instead of secrets. She thought about James, about the attic full of documents, about 3 years of grief and rage and stubborn refusal to let go. Maybe this was why. Maybe all of it, the pain, the fear, the fighting, had been leading to this. A chance to turn suffering into something better. The town of Red Hollow held a meeting 2 weeks later in the high school gymnasium. Nearly everyone showed up, cramming into the bleachers, standing along the walls. Mara stood at the front with Sarah beside her, facing the crowd. She'd been nervous about this moment, uncertain how the town would respond. These were the people who'd called her crazy, who'd whispered about the widow on the ridge who couldn't let go. But when she explained her plan to build a sanctuary on her property, to care for the horses rescued from Fort Carson, to create something permanent and meaningful, the gymnasium erupted in applause. Hank Drummond stood first. "I'll help with construction. Free labor." Dutch Caraway was next. "I can donate lumber for my property." One by one, people volunteered. Time, materials, money, expertise. The town that had abandoned her was coming back, not out of guilt, but out of genuine desire to help. Frank Howell stepped forward last. "Red Hollow takes care of its own," he said simply. "We forgot that for a while. We won't forget again." Construction began in early spring. The sanctuary took shape slowly but surely, rising from the mountain ridge like a promise made solid. Stables built to accommodate the rescued horses, each stall spacious and clean, paddocks with good fencing and soft ground, a small clinic where Sarah could provide care. And at the center of it all, a memorial. A simple stone marker engraved with names, the horses who hadn't survived, who'd died in the experiments or been disposed of before anyone could save them. And at the top of the list, James Vance, the man who'd started it all. The first horses arrived in June, transported by federal authorities who'd finished processing them as evidence. They came down the ramp slowly, hesitantly, like prisoners who couldn't quite believe they were free. Mara greeted each one personally, speaking softly, letting them know they were safe now, that no one would hurt them anymore. Ash watched from his paddock, his ears pricked forward with interest. When the last horse was settled, Mara went to him. "What do you think?" she asked. "Ready to share your space?" The horse snorted, tossed his head. Then he turned and limped to the fence line he shared with the nearest paddock, where a gray mare stood trembling. Ash lowered his head and nickered softly. The mare's ears came forward. Cautiously, she approached the fence, stretching her neck to touch noses with him. Two survivors, recognizing something in each other, finding comfort in shared understanding. Mara felt tears prick her eyes. Sarah came to stand beside her, her arm still in a sling but healing well. "You did good, Mara." "So we did good," All of us. James would be proud. Yeah, Mara said softly. I think he would. Summer faded into autumn. The sanctuary settled into routine, feeding, medical checks, gentle training to help the horses learn trust again. Some progressed quickly. Others remained fearful, damaged in ways that might never fully heal. But they were alive, and they were safe. Catherine Reeves continued covering the story as trials began. Facility administrators faced charges ranging from animal cruelty to fraud to conspiracy. Some pled guilty. Others fought and lost. The private equity firm funding the operation was dissolved, its assets seized. Marcus Webb was eventually found in Argentina. Extradition proceedings were initiated. Dr. Eleanor Kane, the original program director, turned out to have left detailed journals before her death, documenting everything she'd witnessed and participated in. Her daughter, Rebecca Kane, had been one of the people who'd quietly helped horses escape disposal, selling them to small auctions under false names. She'd died trying to expose the operation herself. Her death ruled an accident, but now under investigation. Justice was slow and imperfect. But it was happening. 1 year after the facility's closure, Mara stood on her porch watching the sun set over the mountains. The sanctuary spread below her, peaceful in the golden light. Horses grazed in the paddocks. Sarah worked in the clinic, treating a mare with an abscess. Volunteers from town moved between stables, doing evening chores. It looked nothing like the lonely, bitter place it had been 3 years ago. Ash stood at his fence, his coat gleaming, his eyes clear and calm. He'd become the sanctuary's unofficial greeter, the horse who welcomed newcomers and showed them it was possible to heal, the horse no one had wanted, the evidence that should have been erased, the animal who'd carried the truth until someone was brave enough to see it. Mara walked down to his paddock. Ash nickered and limped over, pushing his muzzle against her chest in the gesture she'd come to recognize as affection. "You know what today is?" she asked him softly. The horse's ears swiveled forward. 3 years since James died. 3 years since this whole thing started. She ran her hands along his neck, feeling the steady warmth of his breathing. I spent so long being angry, being broken, thinking I had nothing left worth fighting for. Ash stood quietly, listening. But you showed me different. You showed me that sometimes the most broken things are the ones worth saving. That survival isn't just about enduring, it's about refusing to let them win. She pressed her forehead against his neck, breathing in the scent of hay and horse and mountain air. "Thank you," she whispered, "for being stubborn enough to stay alive, for being evidence, for being exactly what we needed when we needed it most." Ash let out a soft breath, almost like understanding. Below them, lights began flickering on in the town of Red Hollow, once dying, once forgotten, now finding new purpose in the sanctuary that had brought it together. The widow on the ridge was no longer an outcast. She was a founder, a protector, a keeper of truth, and the horse no one wanted had become the symbol that changed everything. Mara stayed with Ash until full dark, watching stars emerge in the cold mountain sky. Somewhere up there, she liked to think, James was watching too, seeing what his investigation had become, seeing that his death hadn't been meaningless. The truth had survived, and it had set them all free. Finally, as the temperature dropped and the wind picked up, Mara gave Ash one final pat and headed back to the cabin. Tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges, more horses who needed saving. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, Mara Vance went to sleep without grief crushing her chest, without rage burning in her veins. She went to sleep at peace, knowing that sometimes justice took longer than it should, that sometimes you had to fight impossible battles against powerful enemies. But that truth, once spoken, could never be completely silenced, and that even the smallest act of courage, buying a dying horse at a county auction, could crack open secrets that powerful men had killed to hide. The sanctuary would stand, the horses would heal, and the legacy of James Vance would live on, not in tragedy, but in the lives saved and the truth finally, irrevocably told. In the paddock below, Ash stood beneath the stars, his head raised to the wind, his eyes reflecting moonlight. No longer property, no longer evidence, no longer disposal, just a horse, free and alive. And that, Mara thought, was the greatest victory of all.